Alan is a 30-year-old hardcore gamer who hasn't seen sunlight in weeks at this point, but who could blame him? He just finished playing a no-hit run on both Sekiro and Dark Souls at the same time. However, now that he's done with that, he needs a new game to play so he doesn't get bored. GTA 6 still isn't out yet, so he starts searching online for another game to play in the meantime, and that's when he comes across a game that never ends. Normally, you'd be concerned about the fact that a game just loaded onto his computer without permission, but he's too captivated to go back now, so he starts scrolling through the settings wheel to set the difficulty. He wants his gaming experience to be as traumatizing as possible, so he turns the difficulty all the way up to hell mode and picks the untested summoner class just to make it even more unpredictable. He then accepts all the terms and conditions without a second thought, but it turns out that there was a clause in there about transporting Alan to another world, so the next thing he knows, he's a newborn baby in the countryside. A year goes by like this, and being a baby isn't as bad as Alan thought it would be. He doesn't have to work or pay any bills, and he has good, loving parents taking care of him. His father's name is Rodden, and his mother is Teresa, and they seem like a lovely couple, but considering the fact that Alan set the game to hell mode, they're likely going to get the Wayne family treatment sooner or later. After Alan is put to bed for the night, he raises his arms and tries all the key phrases he knows in an attempt to open a status screen, because even though he's supposed to be a summoner, he has no idea how the whole summoning thing works. He decides to give it one last try before going to sleep, and this time, something really does appear, but it startles Alan so much that he screams, and his parents come running over to check on him as soon as they hear it, so he is forced to hide the book for now. After making sure Alan is okay, his parents leave his room, and as soon as they are gone, he pulls out his book again. He is so relieved that he finally gets to see his stats after a whole year of trying, and it's around what you would expect for a 1-year-old summoner. His summoning skills are all bottom tier, but the book says they will level up the more he uses them, so Alan decides to give it a try right now. From what he can tell, he's only allowed to summon H-ranked insects and beasts at his current level, but that seems ridiculously weak, so he isn't expecting much. Just then, the book flips to the message section, and Alan finds out that he received a letter from the god of creation of this world. The god basically apologizes for the delay in creating Alan's status book, but since the summoner class was still under development, it took him a whole year to sort through all the necessary paperwork for it. Alan doesn't really care about the apology, but if the god dev team had to rush to finish the summoner class, then there must be some bugs left in there for him to exploit, so he is eager to test it out. He wants to summon an insect first, but he soon realizes that he doesn't actually know how to activate his summoning ability. Normally, he would check the subreddit or watch a tutorial for these kinds of problems, but he doesn't have any internet here, so he's going to have to figure it out on his own. He thinks about it for a few minutes and eventually realizes that he needs to create an insect skill card first, so he gives it a try, and it works perfectly. Now he can finally summon his insect, but before he could do so, his mother comes to check on him again, so Alan is forced to pretend that he's asleep again. The next morning, once his parents are busy with their daily duties, Alan opens his grimoire and finally summons the grasshopper. The room fills with tons of bright lights, and at first, Alan is mesmerized by how pretty it looks, but then a giant grasshopper flies into his face, and he freaks out. He eventually realizes that this is the grasshopper he summoned, so he tries to give it instructions, but it turns out that even though it's a summon, it still only has grasshopper intelligence, so it can't understand a word he's saying. On the bright side, Alan finds out that summoning the grasshopper gave him a boost to his agility and endurance stats, and he's really happy about that, but all of his celebrating gets his mother's attention, and once she finds the giant grasshopper on the floor, she immediately squishes it. Over the next few days, Alan tinkers with the insect's summoning ability, but he's tired of that now, so he decides to try out the beast to summon next. He summons a mouse, and once again the book sends it flying straight at his face, but Alan was expecting it this time, so he's not as startled. The mouse comes with its own set of buffs, but it's still pretty dumb, so Alan can't really talk to it. That said, one of its abilities is called Scurry, and whenever Alan tells the mouse to use it, it does so without fail. That said, this mouse's ability is downright useless, so Alan figures he will need to level up his abilities in order to summon some of the more powerful creatures out there. His grimoire says he's allowed to stock up to 10 summoning cards at once, and fortunately, the buffs for each summon stack as well, so if he stacks 10 mouse summon cards, his attack and HP go up by 10. This already makes him stronger than any regular baby, but he's going to have to level up his skills if he wants to become truly overpowered. Normally, this wouldn't be hard to do, but remember how Alan selected Hell mode because he thought the difficulty would be fun? Well, Leveling up now requires 100 times the normal amount of experience, so he's going to be stuck grinding for a long time. Just then, Rodden returns from a long day hunting, and he's completely covered in blood, but it's okay because it's not his blood. He explains that he just hunted a great boar with the other men from the village, and Alan seems really interested, so Rodden asks him if he would like to come see it. Alan excitedly agrees, so Rodden hoists him onto his neck and starts taking him towards the kill site. This is Alan's first time actually getting to see the outside world, so he's enjoying all the new sights, but it took a lot longer to get to the boar than he thought it would, so he ended up falling asleep in Rodden's arms. Once they arrive at the kill site, Rodden wakes Alan up to show him the boar, and Alan is stunned because this thing is absolutely massive, and I'm not even sure how Rodden managed to take it down in the first place. A few moments later, the villagers nearby notice that Rodden has come back, so they all start cheering for him because he is today's MVP. Alan asks if a great boar is really that strong, so Gerda explains that it is a C-rank monster, and it usually takes at least 20 men to take one down, so they are pretty tough. This info is really useful to Alan because it gives him a solid benchmark on the strength gap between ranks, but before he can even think about summoning any high-rank monster, Alan is going to have to start grinding XP to level up. 10 months of intense grinding later, Alan has finally risen to a level 2 summoner, and the bump comes with great perks like an all-around boost to his stats, as well as the ability to summon G-ranked creatures and fuse them, but doing so requires a lot of MP, so Alan hurriedly eats his dinner to recover some mana and heads back to his room to try it out. Unfortunately, when he opens his grimoire, it tells him he still doesn't have enough mana to fuse any summons because his max MP is too low, so it looks like he is going to need to do even more grinding before he can try anything new. By the time Alan is 3 years old, he has finally raised his MP stats high enough to use his level 2 skill, and with the fusion section, he is able to create a G-rank bird which he names Chappie. Chappie's main skill is voice mimic, and it can basically copy any voice perfectly, making it perfect for distracting enemies. Alan was also able to summon a frog and a mole, and the frog's only ability is to jump up and down while flashing as a distraction, but the mole is a lot more active and can dig a giant hole in a matter of seconds. The G-rank monster skills are a lot more useful than the H ranks, so Alan is finally starting to enjoy the gaming experience in this world, but it's still going to take a long time before he's strong enough to actually fight anything. And speaking of fighting, Gerda's daughter, Krina, comes looking for Alan because she wants to play with him. Krina's idea of playing is challenging him to a duel, and normally, this wouldn't be a problem, but she's way too strong for Alan to keep up with. He even went all out with his summon buffs just to give himself a fighting chance, but he's still no match for her. By the end of the day, Alan and Krina return home, and apparently, while Alan has been grinding his XP this past year, Rodden and Teresa were getting busy because she's pregnant again. Since his mother can't do physical labor anymore, Alan volunteers to help with the harvest to make things easier for Rodden. He is sure he can do it because with all his buffs, he pretty much has the strength and stamina of an adult now, but Teresa and Rodden don't think it would be fair to make their son work, so they tell him he should just stick to doing basic house chores and playing with Krina. Rodden reminds him that he will eventually grow up and have to get a job, so he should enjoy his time as a kid while he doesn't need to work. Alan is a little upset about being turned down at first, but then he remembers that farm work is unbelievably grueling work, and no father would want to force their 3-year-old to do that kind of work, so he agrees to let it go. Rodden is glad to see that Alan understands, but as they continue with dinner, Teresa recalls seeing Alan in the backyard throwing rocks at a tree a little while ago, so she asks him what that was all about. Alan says he was just practicing for self-defense in case a monster attacks their home, but in reality, he was trying to see if he can learn skills aside from summoning by repeating an action over and over, but he didn't have much luck with that. Rodden is impressed by Alan's work ethic and says he can't wait for his appraisal ceremony. Alan has never heard of the appraisal ceremony before, so he asks Rodden what it is, and he is informed that when you turn 5, you are appraised to find out what talents you may have, and if Alan is lucky enough to receive a powerful talent, he might become very rich and successful in the future. Winter rolls around, and Alan decides to summon a grasshopper out in the snow to see how long it can survive, and it lasts a whole day out here, so he is pretty satisfied. However, that satisfaction quickly fades away when Krina comes outside and starts asking him to fight her again. Unsurprisingly, Alan ends up getting his ass handed to him, but while he was busy with his duel against Krina, he completely forgot about the grasshopper he summoned, and it ends up crawling onto Teresa's leg, scaring her so much that she ends up falling over, and falling over while pregnant is a big deal. Rodden runs over to check on her, and she says she's fine, but she clearly isn't because that fall just sent her into labor, so the baby's coming today whether they like it or not. Rodden tells Krina to go call her mother for help, and once she arrives, she helps Teresa through the delivery process, so by morning, the family has a brand new baby boy. Everyone is overjoyed, but Alan doesn't know how he should feel about this. He still isn't sure why a game reincarnated him into this world, but even though it was unexpected, he didn't have much going for him back in Japan, so he's not upset with how things turned out. That's why he has decided to focus solely on leveling up and protecting his new family, because they matter the most to him. By springtime, since Alan's appraisal ceremony is coming up, he asks his dad for some details on what it's like. His dad tells him that all kids have to do it once they turn 5, and if he happens to have an amazing skill, he has a decent chance of making it to the big leagues. But unfortunately, there is a lot of competition this year since a lot of the other kids are also turning 5, and that includes Krina. They all head to the commoner's city so they can undergo the appraisal, but as they approach the church, Alan notices that a lot of the other commoners look really well groomed. Compared to them, he's pretty much wearing rags, and now that he thinks about it, he's been wearing rags since the day he was born. So his family's finances must be way below average for this world, but that doesn't really bother him. They all gather in front of the church, and as the priests come out, they hear a lot of people making fun of the brokies in the crowd, so they tell everyone that they had better be careful of what they say. Blessings are distributed equally to all, so even the poorest farmer could inherit a powerful skill. The priests tell everyone to come inside for the appraisal, and as they are walking towards an altar, Alan notices 3 statues and assumes those must be the gods that are worshipped in this world, one of which is Elmia, the god of creation, and now that Alan thinks about it, Elmia was the one who sent him that apology letter for the class development delay. The first up for appraisal is Palomas, the son of the village chieftain, and he is instructed to place his hand on the crystal ball over there to display his stats. Palomas does as instructed, and on the stone wall, it is revealed that he possesses the merchant class news that his father is really happy to hear. Alan was kind of expecting more to happen, but this is basically the same thing as Grimoire does, with the only difference being the fact that it uses letter rankings instead of numbers. As the appraisal continues, some kids receive strong talents, while some don't receive any at all, and a few hours later, the only ones left are Krina and Alan. Krina is up next, so she excitedly runs up to the ball and puts her hand over it, but it suddenly starts glowing with an intense blinding light. Her father is worried that something might have gone wrong with the appraisal, but it turns out that the priests simply can't believe what they are seeing. According to the appraisal, Krina just received the Sword Lord class, one of the strongest in existence, and her dad is unbelievably happy about it, but she doesn't really understand what's so special about it. Alan isn't too surprised by the news since he's been getting his ass beat by her for years at this point, but next up is Alan's appraisal, so he is told to approach the altar. As he touches the ball, nothing happens for a few seconds, but all of a sudden, there's a large flash of light, and Alan is knocked back. Rodden rushes over to check on him, and after making sure Alan is alright, he walks over to the priest and asks what Alan's talent is since he doesn't know how to read. He's expecting something really good since the crystal reacted strongly, but to his shock, the priest informs him that Alan is completely talentless. Alan can't believe what he's hearing because he knows for a fact that he does have a talent, but when he checks the board, he realizes that all his stats are E-rank across the board, and he blames Elmia for doing a shitty job coding the summoner class. Just then, Rodden hugs Alan from behind to comfort him since he doesn't want Alan to feel bad about being talentless. They head home together, and everyone treats him normally despite the revelation that he is classless, and Alan appreciates how much his family cares for him, but he knows he isn't really talentless. He can still use his Grimoire just fine, so he assumes his E-rank stats must be because he is playing on Helm mode. All the other kids were the same age as him, and relatively equal in strength, so their rank must be a reflection of how much they will grow in the future as they level up. So since Alan requires 100 times the regular amount of XP to level up, his stats are all stuck at E-rank, even if his actual attributes are pretty strong. Most people would get frustrated by this kind of setback, but Alan isn't some filthy casual who enjoys playing games for actual fun. He lives for the soul-crushing grind, but he can't help but worry that there's something wrong with his summoner class because at the bottom of his appraisal, he saw a confusing error code pop up, so he's going to be sending a lot of complaints to the devs about it. The next morning, Alan goes out with his family to visit Krina's family, but he notices that his dad has been acting a bit strange lately. Over at Krina's house, they are all about to celebrate Krina's appraisal as a Sword Lord, but Rodden still has a sour look on his face, and Gerda says he refuses to celebrate with him until he goes back to normal. At first, Alan wonders if Rodden is jealous of Krina and her family, but he knows his dad isn't that petty, so there must be something else going on here. The two of them continue arguing for a second until Gerda reveals that Rodden mentioned severing ties between their families before they sat down together. Rodden defends his decision by reminding Gerda that Krina is a sword lord now, and that means she practically has a guaranteed ticket out of this tiny serfdom. She might even become nobility if she's lucky, and if that happens, then being close to a poor family like Rodden's would only hold her back. Gerda yells that he doesn't care about any of that stuff, but Rodden keeps insisting that he's doing this for Gerda's good, and the two resume their fight, but eventually, their wives pull them apart and get them to calm down. Alan is a bit surprised by how calm everyone was about this whole thing, so he asks Gerda's wife if it's normal for them to argue like this. She explains that this kind of thing used to happen all the time, but they always made up afterwards. All four of them are actually childhood friends who grew up in the same village, and around 10 years ago, when talks of making a new settlement started, they all decided to join the effort and work together to build their houses. Gerda and Rodden bonded a lot over that back then. Recalling the good times makes them realize how silly their fight was. A little while later, news arrives that the Knight's Order has shown an interest in Krina, and they are coming to see her. Alan assumes the news of Krina becoming a sword lord must be spreading really quickly, but while it's good that she has earned some recognition from the Knight's Order, Gerda is still a little concerned because she is too young to become a knight yet. Just then, one of the kids who got a good talent at the appraisal ceremony confronts Alan and tells him that as a talentless loser, he has no place here. Alan doesn't really care about being insulted, since he still got his summoner power, but Krina won't stand for anyone picking on her best friend, so she tells the kid to back off and nearly chops off his finger before Gerda pulls her back. Just then, the chief announces that the Knight's Order has finally arrived, and everyone is thrilled since they rarely get to see the knights in person. The chief calls for Gerda and Krina to come introduce themselves to the captain. Krina is unbelievably excited because she has always wanted to become a knight, so getting to meet the knight captain must be a dream come true for her. Alan wonders if the knights are going to take Krina to the capital to train her, but before the knight captain could say anything, Gerda speaks up and says he can't let Krina go because she's still too young. The captain says that age doesn't matter because if she's a sword lord, then her skills would be more than enough to get her through the training, so there should be no problem. Unless, of course, they were lying about Krina being a sword saint just to trick the Knight's Order. Gerda assures the captain that he isn't lying, but it's already too late because the captain has decided to put Krina to the test. He orders his vice-captain to prepare to have a duel with this 5-year-old, and without a second thought, the vice-captain agrees. Gerda tries to get the knight captain to reconsider since he doesn't want to put Krina's life at risk, but he is told that if she doesn't fight, then it will serve as proof that she lied about her class, and she, along with her entire family, will be executed. The knights then bring out a sword for her to use, and most children would be terrified by this point, but Krina is so battle-hungry that the second she realizes that she gets to use an actual sword, she says she is willing to accept the duel. Everyone gets into position for the duel, and Leibrand faces off against Krina, so as the match begins, Krina charges at Leibrand with full force. Your eyes do not deceive you, she is swinging a sword that's twice her height like it's nothing, and she is actually giving Leibrand a run for his money, but he is still keeping her at bay relatively easily. The knight captain seems unimpressed by Krina's skills so far, but as the fight goes on, she manages to block one of Leibrand's strikes and prepares to retaliate. However, Leibrand punts her across the street and into one of the walls. Gerda is enraged by the way his daughter is being treated, but before he could do anything about it, he is pushed to the floor by the knights, along with Alan and Rodden, when they try to interfere. Alan thinks this is completely unfair, because whether Krina is his sword lord or not, an adult is bound to have more battle experience than her. However, all of a sudden, Krina gets back on her feet, and she's got a menacing aura surrounding her. Without saying a word, she launches another all-out attack with laser focus, and this time, she is completely overwhelming Leibrand, so much so that she eventually slices his sword in half and nearly takes his head off with it. Krina is disappointed that the fight is over already, but she had a lot of fun, so she thanks Leibrand for playing with her and walks off, leaving him with the knowledge that he just lost to a 5-year-old. Gerda is relieved that Krina managed to survive and starts praising her for doing a good job, but then the knight captain approaches, and Gerda becomes defensive because he doesn't want him anywhere near his daughter. The knight captain now acknowledges that Krina is indeed a sword lord, and he apologizes for forcing her to fight in a duel. He says he would like to discuss her future with him, but Gerda firmly refuses. The captain says he can bring his friends with him to the meeting if it would make him feel better, and that would make Gerda feel a little safer, so he agrees. They all gather at the chief's house for lunch, and Xenoph once again apologizes for the way he acted earlier. He explains that he was sent here by the baron of this territory to determine whether there truly was a sword lord in this village, and the results are undeniable. Xenoff mentions that 3 years ago, there was a sword saint born to the family of a count, but this strikes Alan as weird since he knows for a fact that sword saints can only be born from low social statuses according to the game's design, so that one must have been a fake. Saint Sword Lord went on to serve the royal family, but failed to meet expectations there, and upon reappraisal, it was discovered that they were actually an ordinary swordsman pretending to be a sword lord. It was also later discovered that several nobles were greatly exaggerating their abilities, so the kingdom had to establish a zero-tolerance policy for falsified talent results. That said, he is still truly sorry for putting Krina through such a harsh trial. He tells Gerda that he doesn't need to worry about them taking Krina away from him because they won't do that. They want her to continue her training at home, and when she turns 12, if she wants, she can attend the academy to become a knight. 2 years of training later, Alan finally unlocks level 3 of his grimoire, and he is really excited about it. The level up grants him the enhanced skill, which means he can strengthen his summons now, and he can also hold 30 F rank ones at once now, so the buffs he can stack are going to be amazing. He plans to experiment with it later, but for now, he's got to head back inside for dinner. As for updates on Alan's family, his little brother is turning 2, and his mom is pregnant again, so he's getting another little brother or sister. His parents start thinking of a name for the new kid, and at that moment, Alan happens to receive a message from the god of creation, Elmia, so he unconsciously says his name out loud. His parents misunderstand and assume Alan is suggesting they should name the baby after the god of creation, which is a big no-no in this world, and Alan can't really explain why he said it, so he quickly changes the subject and mentions how Rodden's scars seem to have completely vanished recently. Rodden explains that it's because he passed the trial of the gods earlier today while fighting a boar, but Alan has never heard of such a thing before, so he asks what it means, and Rodden explains that every once in a while, after a battle, you feel your body being refreshed and all your wounds being healed, and Alan assumes it must be the effects of leveling up in this world. Rodden is a strong warrior, so he must level up quite often, but as for Alan, even though his grimoire is level 3, his body is still only level 1 because he hasn't fought any monsters yet, and if he wants to grow stronger, then he is going to have to engage in battle. However, that's easier said than done, because he isn't allowed to leave the village without permission. The only exception to that rule would be hunting expeditions, but the second Alan tries to bring up the idea of joining the next hunt, his father turns him down because he doesn't want Alan putting himself in danger. That night, once everyone else is asleep, Alan opens his grimoire to read the message he got from Elmia, and he already has a good idea of what it's about since he left a strongly worded complaint after the appraisal ceremony. Long story short, Elmia apologizes for the technical bug that made Alan appear talentless during the appraisal, but it has been fixed now, so the next time he gets appraised, his summer class will show up. It also explains that all of Alan's ranks show up as E rank because of his Hell mode difficulty, but in reality, he is a lot stronger than E rank, so a separate stats section has been added for him. Alan takes a look at his new stat sheet, and it's a lot better than he thought it would be. He's got a bunch of S and A rank stats, which is about the same as what Krina got, so he is satisfied with the results of all his efforts. Now that he's done with that, he decides to begin experimenting with his new abilities, and the first thing he wants to try is the enhanced skill, so he summons a grasshopper card and uses this skill. The effects of the skill boost the stats of the grasshopper directly, but it doesn't affect the buffs granted to Alan by extension. He decides to summon the grasshopper to see what a boosted summon looks like in person, and as it appears, it glows for a few seconds to indicate that it has been boosted. Aside from that, not much else is different, but before Alan could test out anything else, his mother suddenly comes in to check on him, and as soon as she spots the grasshopper, she freaks out and squishes it. The next morning, Rodden gets ready to go hunting, and while he's gone, Alan heads to the backyard to do a little more testing with his grimoire. He has attempted a bunch of different combinations in an attempt to unlock a new summon, but so far, nothing seems to be working and he's done with his last pair of viable cards. Fortunately, this time, the fusion is successful, and he receives a new card, but he's not sure it's going to be useful, since its description says grass. On the bright side, it looks like the grass summon grants him an MP buff, so he can use it to increase the number of summons he can perform throughout the day. He then summons the grass card to find out what it's like, and an apple creature pops out, which leaves him even more confused than he was before. The apple doesn't have any combat skills, but it does possess a skill called aroma, so Alan asks it to demonstrate, and it suddenly sinks into the ground before sprouting a stem. The stem does indeed have a wonderful aroma, but just then, Alan's mom comes to check on him again, and he tries to get the apple to hide itself, but it doesn't seem to be listening, so she ends up spotting the stem. Fortunately, she thinks it's just a regular stem, so she doesn't suspect anything, but Alan is still going to need to run a bunch of tests on this thing to figure out how it works. Later on in the day, Alan is training with Krina as usually, and even with the extra buffs from his level up, he is still no match for her strength, but Krina does notice that Alan has gotten a lot tougher. He is surprised to hear that, so he takes a look at his stats and realizes that his sword mastery stat is already at level 3 thanks to all the training he does with Krina, and he is really happy that his skill is improving. Now that he thinks about it, he also recently got a dog summon that has a bite attack, and he would love to try it out, but he doesn't think it would be fair to use it on Krina. After that, Alan spends the rest of the day throwing rocks at the tree in the backyard in hopes of awakening a new skill or something, but it hasn't been going well so far, so he is starting to feel like this is a huge waste of time. He also hasn't had a chance to do any other training since he has to look after his brother most of the time. Mash tells Alan that he is bored of throwing rocks at the tree, so Alan apologizes and says they can do something else after he gets a few more reps in. While Alan is preparing for his final tosses, Mash suddenly notices a bunch of saplings growing next to the house, and he is amazed since he doesn't recall seeing them there yesterday. Those saplings are the result of Alan activating a ton of apple summons at once for the MP buff, and thanks to the buff, he is able to fully restore his MP in 5 hours instead of the usual 6, so he can use over 15% more mana per day now. By nightfall, everyone gathers for dinner as usual, but Rodden isn't back from his hunt yet, which is really odd, especially since they didn't intend to go deep into the forest today. Teresa is obviously worried, but she's trying to stay optimistic about the situation. However, all optimism goes out with Window in on CD. She hears the sounds of the panicked hunters carrying Rodden's body back home. Rodden was apparently injured during the hunt today, and just by looking at him, it's clear that he's lucky to be alive. He got hit by one of the boar's fangs in the gut, and while the other hunters managed to cauterize the wound to keep him alive, he's still on the verge of death. The only reason he even managed to last this long was thanks to the healing herb they gave him on the way here. Teresa is surprised to hear this since healing herb is really expensive, and she doesn't understand how they managed to get their hands on some, so Gerda explains that when the Knight Captain apologized for the way he treated them, part of the apology was a bag of gold coins, which is what they used to buy the herbs, but it wasn't enough to completely heal Rodden. The other hunters all start yelling about how this whole thing is those commoners' fault, but all the noise wakes Mash up and makes him start crying, so Alan takes him back to bed, and the rest of the hunters decide to leave, to give the family some peace and quiet for now. Once everyone has calmed down, Alan asks about what happened, and if a commoner is really to blame for it all. Gerda explains that a few days ago, he and Rodden were summoned by the village chief and told that they should allow the commoners to join them on their next hunt. Boar meat is a valuable commodity, and while most of it has to go to the Baron, the rest is split amongst the people involved in the hunt. They sometimes trade it for other goods, but aside from that, it's difficult to get any decent boar meat unless you hunt for it yourself. Despite this, no commoners have ever volunteered to be part of the hunts, and it's because it's an extremely dangerous task. There are casualties every year, and even more injuries, so commoners usually avoid getting involved. But since Rodden recently became famous as a legendary hunter, many commoners got the impression that as long as Rodden was around, they could just let him handle dealing with the boar while they reap the benefits afterwards, so they asked the chief to include them in the hunts. Rodden and Gerda were against the idea, but they couldn't refuse an order from the chief, so they were forced to let the commoners join, and it went just as bad as they thought it would. During training sessions, all the commoners were slacking off, and when the time finally came for the hunt, the moment they actually came face to face with a boar, they all got scared and dropped their weapons as they ran away. This completely broke up the hunting party's formation, but as if that wasn't bad enough on its own, one of the commoners fell over while the boar was chasing him, so Rodden instinctively stepped in to protect him, but he got skewered in the stomach as a result. The others eventually managed to slay the boar, so Gerda says he will bring the share of meat meant for Rodden by tomorrow, but there's not much else he can do to help, and Alan feels like a total loser because up till now, he had been focusing on only leveling himself up instead of actually helping his family. By the next morning, Rodden regains consciousness, and everyone is happy that he is alive, but Alan is still deep in thought. He had been treating this world like a game this entire time, but to the people that live here, this isn't a game, it's their reality, and they have to struggle to survive, so the least he could do is use his power to help them. A little while later, Gerda returns with Rodden's share of the meat as promised, and he is relieved to see that Rodden is awake, but he's still in terrible shape, so he's probably not going to be able to hunt anymore to prepare for winter. Gerda offers to share his stockpile with Rodden and his family to help, and Rodden appreciates it, but all of a sudden, Alan speaks up and tells everyone that he wants to take over for Rodden. They can all tell that he's serious about it, so there are no objections, and later that morning, he gets to work by fetching some water from the well. The other men there warn him not to overdo it since that much water would be difficult for a child, but Alan is easily able to carry it home. Till now, he had been hiding the effects of his stat buffs, but with everyone already focusing their attention on Krenna since she's an upcoming hero, it should be fine for him to stand out a bit. After he's done fetching water, he heads out into the fields with Gerda to harvest the potatoes. Gerda demonstrates the best method to pull the potatoes out of the ground, and he assumes Alan is going to struggle with it, but to his surprise, Alan is able to do it one-handed. He harvests 3 baskets of potatoes in no time, but after all that work, he realizes that more than half of these have to be given away to the Baron, and that's really unfair. He's trying to figure out how to get more food for his family, but all of a sudden, the chief shows up, and he's here to apologize to Rodden. It was partially his fault that Rodden ended up like this, so he wanted to make things right, and he also brought the guy who caused the accident to apologize as well. The guy doesn't seem like a bad person, he was just too scared to think straight back then, and he accepts full responsibility for the situation. Rodden isn't really mad at him, but he tells the guy to be more careful next time, and he promises not to make the same mistake twice. Later on, Alan heads out into the fields and clears out a wide area because he came up with an idea. He summons a bunch of frogs and has them use their provoke skills to lure out some potential prey. However, instead of the few ducks he was expecting, he actually ends up attracting a monster bird. At first, he thinks it's best to run away while he still can, but then he realizes that it would really help his family if he defeated the bird. Plus, he's got a bunch of stats boosts, so he thinks he should be strong enough to handle it and ends up deciding to attack. He runs in and whacks the bird across the head while it's not looking, and then he summons several dogs to attack it all at once. The dogs are doing a fair bit of damage, but unfortunately, the bird is too strong for them, so it takes them out, one after the other. It then goes after Alan, and since his summons have all been defeated, he has lost the majority of his buffs as well, so he is in serious danger here. He needs to act quickly if he doesn't want to end up as bird food, so when he gets the chance, he summons 2 leeches that start sucking on the bird's neck. Alan had never really tested them out before this, but thankfully, as expected, they seem to have an energy drain ability, so they can weaken the bird enough for him to stand a chance. Once they get himself free, Alan summons even more leeches and wolves, and with their combined efforts, he is finally able to deal the finishing blow and defeat the monster. Alan can hardly believe it since this is his first kill, but his grimoire confirms that the bird is indeed dead, and he even received 100 XP as a reward. Later that day, Alan returns home with the bird, and his entire family is left speechless because they can't believe he actually managed to kill something like that. Alan tells them he just happened to catch it off guard while it was distracted, which is mostly true, but he did leave out the part about his summons. Gerda starts inspecting the bird's corpse because he is wondering how Alan managed to beat it with just a wooden sword and some rocks, but then he notices some bite marks on the bird and asks Alan about them. Alan makes up an excuse and says he was fighting on instinct, so he had to do whatever was necessary, and Gerda begins picturing Alan biting down on the bird for dear life, but regardless of how he pulled it off, it's still an impressive feat, so he congratulates him on a job well done. He even offers to help Alan bleed and dry the meat, since this is his first time. So they head over to the rack together. The Aldebaran weighs around 60 kilograms, but once it has been bled dry, it drops to around 20 kilos, and only around half of the bird's meat is actually edible. That said, the wings do fetch a pretty penny, and it does come with a magic stone, but at the end of the day, they still have to fork most of it up to the higher-ups. Alan thinks the whole 60% tax on all food thing is really unfair, and Gerda agrees with him, but there's nothing they can do about it. At least that would normally be the case, but since Alan's situation is a bit unique, they might be able to negotiate the chief into letting them keep more than usual. A little while later, both Alan and Gerda head to the chief's office to tell him about the bird Alan caught, and the chief is very pleased, but then Gerda suggests that Alan should only hand over the wings as tax, and keep the rest for himself. This catches the chief off guard, and he tries to explain that they can't do that because the Baron has requested more food than usual this year, but then Gerda reminds the chief that the only reason Alan was forced to go out and hunt was because of his unreasonable demand that led to Rodden getting injured. At this rate, Alan's family might actually starve since they barely have enough to eat, and to really sell the story, Alan acts like he's going to faint from hunger on the spot. The chief feels really guilty, but he's still hesitant to cut Alan's taxes, so to sweeten the deal a little, Gerda offers to throw in the bird's magic stone. The chief eventually agrees to the deal, and Alan and Gerda are really happy to hear that, but they aren't done yet, because Alan asks if this means he can keep all the meat aside from the wings with any future birds he catches. The chief is once again hesitant to agree, but Gerda reminds him that it's pretty rare for a kid to catch an Aldebaran all on his own, so what are the odds of it happening again? The chief eventually agrees to let Alan keep most of the meat of any of his future catches under the assumption that he won't be able to catch another bird anytime soon, but he was wrong. Later on, Alan heads back out into the fields, and this time, he manages to lure in 2 Aldebarans at once. By now, he has gotten the strategy down pat, so he sends out the leeches first to weaken the birds, and after that, he throws some rocks at their heads to disorient them. Next, he orders his wolves to attack with full force, and after they've whittled down the birds' health, he whacks them over the head with his sword to finish them off. Alan has been going on hunts every 3 days for a while now, but this is the first time he has ever managed to succeed without losing a single one of his summons, so he's really pleased with himself, and to make it even better, he has finally gained enough XP to go up to level 2. He excitedly opens his status screen so he can see how much his stats went up, and it looks like he got a 60% boost to his stats, which is a little less than what he was expecting. But it's still a huge increase, so he's happy regardless. It took him 6 years to go up 1 level, but now that it has finally happened, he thinks it's about time that he lets his family know the truth about him. A little while later, he returns home with both of the birds, and his father is amazed that he managed to catch 2 of them at once, but he also notices that there's something different about Alan today. However, Alan still has a bunch of other things to do, including his sparring session with Krenna, so he leaves before Rodden gets a chance to say much. After today's haul, Alan has officially captured 10 birds total, so his family should be able to use that to make it through the winter. He would like to keep hunting birds to see if he can make it to level 3, but he doubts he would be able to find that many birds in time. Thanks to his stat boost, Alan can keep up with Krenna a lot easier now. But he got distracted by his thoughts for a moment, and that was enough time for her to sneak up from behind and smack him on the head. Later that night, Alan calls a meeting with his family, and once they are all present, he informs them that he isn't actually talentless. He can't reveal the exact details, but he basically explains that when he was a baby, he received an oracle from the god, Elmia, and that means he is smarter and stronger than the average person, but he's also going to have to work 100 times harder than normal to grow stronger. His parents believe him, but they are devastated because it sounds a lot like Alan was cursed, and they aren't wrong, but it was actually self-inflicted when he chose to play on hell mode. Alan also tells them that the only reason he was appraised as talentless was because his talent was too new to be recognized. His parents are amazed to hear that and ask if this means Alan really does have a talent, but he tells them he doesn't know what it is yet. He thought about revealing the fact that he's a summoner at first, but he eventually decided not to because he doesn't know how people will react once they find out that he can summon and control living creatures. Even though they don't know what Alan's talent is, they are relieved to find out that he is talented because now it makes sense why he spent so much time throwing rocks at trees and hunting monsters, but they wish he would have told them sooner. Rodden asks Alan what he plans to do from now on, and Alan says he's going to continue doing his best to grow stronger, so his dad reminds him that he should feel free to ask for help if he needs it. But in the meantime, he probably shouldn't mention this to anyone else because it would be really bad if he were mistaken for a false prophet. Though it's probably fine to talk to Gerda about it since he isn't a snitch, and Rodden really wants to brag to him about how amazing Alan is. The next day, the first winter snow hits, so it's time for Alan to start bartering with the bird meat he stocked up on, and Gerda is coming along to show him the ropes. Gerda plans to trade in some of the boar meat he stocked up on before the winter. Fortunately, there haven't been any more accidents since. As long as there are no commoners to mess things up, the hunts usually go pretty smoothly, but hearing that gets Alan thinking, and he wonders what the difference is between serfs like him and Gerda, and the commoners. Gerda explains that commoners have a higher social standing than serfs, and the taxes they pay are also a bit different. Whereas serfs have to pay 60% of all the food they make as taxes, commoners only have to pay a head tax, meaning they pay 1 gold coin per person each year. Alan asks if it's possible for a serf to become a commoner, and Gerda explains that it is indeed possible, but you'd need to pay a tribute of 10 gold coins in order to do so. Alan does some quick math, and since his mom has another baby on the way, he would need to pay 50 gold coins for all of them to become commoners, which is a lot of money, but he's going to make it happen sooner or later. Alan spends the rest of the day shadowing Gerda to learn how much his bird meat is worth in the barter system, and by day 2, he has a decent enough understanding of it to make the trip on his own. A bag of salt costs him around 5 pieces of jerky, and that same bag of salt would be worth 5 silver coins, so 1 piece of meat is worth 1 silver coin. With the currency system, 1 gold coin is worth around 100 silver coins, so if Alan wants to save up 50 gold coins for his family, then he is going to need to hunt for the equivalent of 500 pieces of the Aldebaran meat. That seems like a lot, but Alan is sure he can get it done within a few years. For his next stop, Alan heads to the local potion store and asks if they have any MP recovery potions. The store clerk tells Alan he doesn't sell anything that fancy, so Alan asks if he has any healing herbs in stock instead. Hearing Alan mention the healing herb strikes a nerve with the store clerk, because he got a bad deal last time he sold one. He recalls that a guy named Gerda came in here, begging to buy some healing herb to save his buddy. It usually costs 5 gold coins, but Gerda only had 3 at the time, so he begged the store clerk to give him a discount and promised to pay it back later. Gerda seemed so desperate that the clerk decided to help him out, and to his credit, he did come back to pay the balance later, but the clerk was really worried that he might have gotten scammed at the time. Alan knows that his father wouldn't have survived if the clerk hadn't agreed to give Gerda a discount that day, so he thanks him for his kindness and offers him a piece of bird meat as a gift. Later on, Alan is walking through the streets when he spots a weapon shop, and he is surprised that a single weapon can cost as much as 50 gold on its own, but while he's minding his own business, all of a sudden, Dogora comes out of nowhere and picks a fight with him. He tries to assert dominance and convince Alan to become his minion, but Alan isn't going to let that kind of disrespect slide, so he sets his baggage down and pulls out his wooden sword before pointing it at Dogora. Now, he could beat Dagora's ass right now and be done with it, but he wants this to be a fair ass whooping, so he tells Dogora to go get himself a weapon. Dogora accepts the challenge and runs off to get his club, and he thinks he's got the upper hand, but Alan is a lot more skilled when it comes to combat thanks to his training with Krina, so he easily mops the floor with Dogora. Long story short, by spring, Dogora starts coming over to Alan's house so Alan can train him, but he's still a long way off from being able to compete. Mash has also begun training with Krina, but she's taking it a lot easier on him than she would with Alan since he's still new to combat, while Alan is watching the two of them. Dogora tries to sneak attack him, but Alan's reflexes are too quick for that, so he ends up falling over and hurting his knee in the process. That night, Rodden and Gerda return, and they got some bad news because they were just in a meeting with the village chief, and he says the Baron wants them to deliver 15 boars instead of the usual 10 this year. He is also demanding that they allow the commoners to hunt with them again this year, but after what happened last time, Rodden and Gerda were wholeheartedly against it. Even so, they can't go against a direct order from the Baron, so they have no choice but to let it happen and hope for the best. Just then, Alan speaks up and tells everyone he has a plan. The reason having commoners join the hunt is a problem is because they are pretty much useless, but he has countless hours of experience in every MMO imaginable, and he is confident he can make even the most hopeless newbie useful to the team, so he asks to be put in charge of training the commoners before the hunts. When the time for the next hunt finally arrives, Rodden takes Alan to meet with the other hunters and tells them that he would like to use one of Alan's hunting strategies for today, but he makes it clear that Alan is just here to watch for the day, so he won't be doing any fighting. Alan already agreed to this arrangement, but he is a little disappointed that his dad won't let him fight since he was looking forward to leveling up, but Rodden wouldn't budge on it, so he might as well just take what he can get. The most important thing for this trip is that they train the newbies enough so they can handle themselves, because he wouldn't want a repeat of what happened last time. Speaking of last time, the guy that was responsible for getting Rodden hurt comes up to him to apologize again, and he tells Rodden that if anything bad happens today, he doesn't need to put himself at risk just to protect him. Rodden tells the kid that all he needs to do is focus on fulfilling his role, and if he can do that, then hopefully nothing will go wrong. With that, the hunt team heads out into the forest to search for their prey, and this is technically the first time Alan has been allowed to leave the village walls to go into the forest, so he is really excited. Once they make it out into the forest, Gerda reminds everyone of the plan and tells them to get into their positions. A few of the newbies act as bait to lure out a boar, and once the boar comes running out of the brush, it is intercepted by Gerda and his squad. After they've successfully stopped the boar, Rodden and the others come running in from the sides and stab it over and over. This is the strategy that Rodden and the others have successfully used to hunt for the past 10 years, but it doesn't work very well with spineless newbies, which is why Alan suggested a little change. While the others will still do most of the work taking the boar down, the newbies will stand off to the side so they don't get in their way, and when the time is right, Alan tells them to go stab the boar along with the others. With the way experience works in this world, they just need to deal a little damage to the boar to receive XP from it, so this should help them level up. The boys do as Alan instructed, and sure enough, as the boar is defeated, they feel a sudden surge of power flow through their bodies, meaning they must have passed the trial of the gods, or in other words, they just leveled up. Alan is really glad that his plan worked as intended, but unfortunately, he didn't get to enjoy any of that free XP since he didn't land any hits on the boar. The next day, Alan is over by the well with a few of the older guys when he hears that one of them has been focusing on butchering meat instead of hunting, since his wife is pregnant and he wants to play it safe, and since that's the case, Alan asks him for a little favor. He leads the man back to his house and shows him the set of Aldebarans that he recently captured. The man is amazed that such a little kid was able to catch so many birds, but Alan explains that he has a bit of a problem. He can't handle butchering all these birds on his own, so he was hoping the man would help him out a little, and in exchange, Alan is willing to give him 2 packs of meat per bird butchered. The man is more than willing to help since it's a really good deal for him, but he asks Alan if he's really okay with giving out so much meat as payment. Alan assures him that it's fine, and the reason he's okay with it is because these birds are part of his family's food reserves. Alan caught these birds specifically so he could sell them to earn the 50 gold coins he needs to raise his family's status. Later that day, Alan is back out in the forest with the hunting group, and they've got a few extra newbies with them today. The plan is to gradually expand the group until they have enough people to make 2 groups to hunt twice the amount of boar like the Baron wanted, but Alan is still a little curious about why the Baron is so interested in increasing the amount of boar captured, since it's not like there's a food shortage or anything. Just then, a boar comes charging out of the forest, so all the hunters prepare themselves, and just like last time, after the boar has been brought under control, the newbies are called over to join in for the finishing blow. Just like last time, the newbies all level up from the free experience they gained, but thanks to some quick thinking from Alan, he also managed to reap the benefits of the kill. All he had to do was send out one of his grasshoppers and let it be squished by the boar to technically make himself a participant of the battle, and it worked out just as he hoped it would since he managed to make it to level 3, but he does feel a little guilty for sacrificing one of his summons like that. 3 months later, Alan and the others are invited to go to the chief's mansion to celebrate the start of a new year, and now that the party is over, he and Krina are walking back home. Krina is really happy since they got a lot of free candy, but Alan assumes that was just a reward for meeting the 15 boar quota. They eventually return home and meet up with their families, as they are about to throw a New Year's celebration of their own, and as they all dig in, Rodden begins praising Alan for his genius idea to safely integrate the newbies into the hunting parties, and thanks to that, they should have no trouble meeting the 20 boar quota next year. As they continue to talk, Gerda happens to notice a bottle behind Alan, so he asks what it is, and Alan explains that he received a bottle of liquor from the chief as a gift earlier. Gerda and Rodden are really excited to hear this because they've been looking forward to getting to drink, but Alan reminds them that the liquor was personally given to him, so they can't have it unless he says so. This is all part of his plan to get them to let him fight during the hunts, so he says he will only let them have it if they can beat him in a game. Rodden and Gerda are desperate for that liquor, so they agree to Alan's terms and ask what game he wants to play, to which Alan answers that he wants to arm wrestle. Gerda and Rodden are fine with that, but before the game begins, Alan asks them what they are going to give him if he wins because he needs some kind of reward for his effort. Rodden can tell that Alan already has something in mind, so he asks him to just tell them what it is, and that's when Alan explains that he just wants them to let him fight in future hunts. Rodden doesn't like the idea, but he sees no harm in playing along since he's sure he's going to win anyway, so he and Gerda get ready to arm wrestle with Alan. First up is Gerda, and he seems pretty confident that he won't lose a contest of strength against a 7-year-old, but unfortunately for him, Alan has stocked up on every strength buff available with his summons, so as the match begins, Alan matches Gerda's strength and eventually manages to overpower him. Gerda can't believe he lost, but Rodden kind of expected as much considering all the amazing things Alan has been doing lately, but he is still confident that Alan won't be able to beat him like he did with Gerda, so after a short break, Rodden locks arms with Alan. Just like with Gerda, Alan matches Rodden's strength at first, but this time, Alan actually ends up getting overpowered and losing. He assumes Gerda must have strength somewhere around D rank, which means Rodden's must be around C rank, so it makes sense he couldn't win. As promised, he hands over the liquor, but he swears he will get strong enough to beat Rodden someday. Later that year, Alan finally manages to level up his summoning skills again, and now he's got access to a bunch of E-rank summons. He's still going to need to do some experimenting to figure out what kind of summons he's got now, but he has more than enough MP to spare for a few tests. The level of buffs provided by E-rank summons is bound to be stronger than that of the F-rank ones, so Alan is certain he would be able to beat Rodden in arm wrestling now, but before he could run off to go challenge his dad, he notices an extra feature in his grimoire, and it says storage. Alan taps the icon, and his grimoire opens to a page with a black square on it, so he assumes this must be the storage skill in question. He decides to test it out by throwing a rock inside to see how deep it is, but after the rock goes in, he doesn't hear it hit the bottom. He reaches his hand in to see if he can feel the inside of the storage space, and as he does so, he gets a mental image of the rock he threw in earlier. He decides to try throwing even more things inside, and basically, as long as it can fit through the opening in the book, there is no limit to how much the space can store. But this seems a little too broken to be a random skill he unlocked, so he has a lot of questions. After all, something like infinite storage is a top-tier skill, so he really doubts the devs would go handing it out without a reason. Most of the time, whenever you receive a useful-looking item or skill, it is usually because you're going to need to use it in the near future, so Alan needs to figure out what the intended use is supposed to be. That aside, he also wants to try out his new E-rank summons, so he tries calling one out, but nothing happens. Alan is surprised that it didn't work since he's sure he has enough MP for the summon, but that's when the system informs him that he will need E-rank magic stones in order to summon an E-rank monster. He had no idea he would need magic stones for this, but as luck would have it, he just so happens to have a stash of magic stones he got from few rabbit monsters around the village, so after retrieving them, he heads outside and tries to summon the E-rank insect again, but it still doesn't work. This is when he recalls the storage space and decides to try throwing the magic stones in there to activate the summon, and that seems to do the trick, so Alan is able to summon a beautiful butterfly, although it's a lot bigger than he thought it would be. Just then, Alan's mother comes over to check on him, and considering how squeamish she gets around bugs, Alan doesn't want to risk finding out what will happen if she spots a giant butterfly, so he hides behind his back while making up an excuse to keep her from getting suspicious. He then decides to head out into the fields to try out his next summon, and it's a good thing he did because the summon turned out to be a saber-toothed tiger, and it's really scary in person. He then tries to fuse the butterfly and the tiger to see what he will get, but nothing really happens. He then tries throwing a few more magic stones into storage, and that seemed to do the trick, but he's going to need a lot more magic stones if he wants to try more summons. Later that night, while having dinner, he asks his dad if there are any more rabbit monsters in the village, but Rodden tells him all the rabbits are gone. They dug a ditch around the village a few years back to get rid of most of them since they are pretty dangerous to have around kids, but if all the rabbits are really gone, then Alan is going to need to find another way to gather magic stones. The next day, during training, he decides to ask Palomas about magic stones, and he is informed that they are mostly used to power magic items, but the E-rank ones are seen as practically useless, so it's pretty common to just find them scattered across the ground. Alan hadn't even considered the possibility that he could find the magic stones on the ground, but now that he does know, he's got a lot of scavenging to do. A little while later, Alan has managed to gather enough magic stones to unlock all his new summons, and he can already imagine how powerful he will become if he keeps progressing, because his summon ability allows him to fill out all the roles of an average party all on his own, so with countless beasts at his disposal, he will be unstoppable. A little while later, the chief invites Rodden, Gerda, and Alan to dinner and informs them that the Baron apparently intends to pay the village a visit next month. He says he wants to watch the boar hunting, which annoys Gerda a lot because the Baron has already put them through enough stress with his boar quota increases. Rodden says he has no problem with the Baron watching the hunts, but he doesn't understand why Alan was called to deliver such news, and that's when the chief reveals that he was actually hoping Alan would act as the tour guide for the Baron while he's in town. Alan personally doesn't like the idea of having to entertain the Baron, but at the rate he's going, it will take him close to 10 years to hunt enough birds to grant his family commoner status, and that's way too long. However, if he manages to impress the Baron enough, he might be able to earn a promotion from him, so he decides to do it. A month later, Baron Granville arrives in the village along with his daughter, Cecile, and Knight Captain Zenoff, and they are brought back to the chief's house for lunch. First of all, Granville apologizes for making such an unreasonable request with the boar meat last year, but he simply couldn't refuse a direct order from the king. The chief is shocked to hear that the boar quota increase came from the king himself, but Granville clarifies that the real culprit behind it was Viscount Carnal, because he intentionally called attention to the boar meat in front of the king to goad him into making the order. A little while later, the food is served, and both Granville and Cecile are amazed by how delicious the meat is, so Granville asks the chief what the dish is called, but the chief has no idea how to respond, so Alan cuts in and explains that the meat is from a bird he hunted and prepared yesterday, specifically so the Baron would have the freshest ingredients for his meal. Granville is impressed by how well-mannered Alan is, so he asks if he is the chief's son, but Zenoff remembers meeting him last time he was in the village and recognizes him as the son of Rodden, the renowned boar slayer. The Baron is impressed by Alan's manners and asks if he happens to come from a family of former knights, but the chief explains that Alan and his family are just serfs. As soon as Cecile hears this, she becomes outraged that the chief would let a filthy serf set foot in the guest hall, but her father scolds her and tells her serfs are valued members of the fiefdom, so she can't go around treating them like trash. Cecile apologizes for what she said, but now she's mad at Alan for some reason, and he can already tell that she's going to be a pain in his ass later. Fortunately, unlike his daughter, the Baron seems like a reasonable person, so when Alan explains that he is going to be in charge of showing them around during tomorrow's hunt, he thanks him for volunteering and says he looks forward to it. Zenoff mentions that if the 20 boar quota proves too difficult for them to manage, he can have his knight take over the hunts, and Granville thinks that's a good idea since he doesn't want to overburden them, but Alan interjects and tells them that won't be necessary because they are more than capable of meeting the quota on their own. The following morning, the Baron's carriage has been prepared, and he is entrusting Zenoff with protecting Cecile should anything go wrong during the expedition. Before long, they set out into the forest, and upon arrival, Alan shows them to a tower prepared in advance so they can watch the boar hunt from a safe distance. Alan leads them all into the tower's perch, and Cecile really seems to be enjoying the view because she has never seen so many trees before. A few moments later, Rawdon and the rest of the warriors arrive, and Granville is impressed to see that they've acquired armor. Alan explains that they put the boar hide from the previous year's hunts to good use, creating all sorts of tools and equipment to make the boar hunts go smoother. As the hunt begins, Granville notices a few warriors who aren't wearing any armor run into the forest alone, so Alan explains that those guys are in charge of luring the boars out of the forest and into the hunting grounds, though they will probably have to be patient if they want to see any action since luring the boars out takes quite a while. While they wait, Xenoph asks Alan how Krina has been doing lately, and Alan tells him she has been doing great. Xenoph is glad to hear that and informs Alan that he will be dispatching a tutor to prepare her for the academy entrance exams in spring, and Alan can't help but chuckle because he thinks it will be funny to see Krina study for a change. A few moments later, the luring team returns with a boar hut on their trail, and everyone gets into position. Using a couple boar hide shields they made, they box the boar in, and Alan explains that the shields are made from the hardest part of the boar's hide to make it penetration proof. After locking the boar in place, the strike team moves in and begins stabbing it from the side, while the long spear team, comprised of the most inexperienced members of the group, also join in to aid the attack. But Cecile wasn't prepared for how gory a boar hunt really is, so she's starting to feel sick at the sight of all the blood. Rawdon then finishes the boar off with a blow to the neck, and it's so gruesome that it causes Cecile to pass out on the spot. Everyone begins to celebrate once the boar is dead, and both Granville and Xenoph are crucial to the fighting prowess of these warriors. However, a moment later, another loud roar echoes from the forest as two boars come charging toward the group. Xenoph realizes this is bad and orders his knights to be ready to jump in if necessary, but Alan tells him that their assistance won't be needed because the hunting squad is perfectly capable of handling two boars at once. Rawdon orders the team to split into two groups to handle the boars separately, and Alan thinks to himself that a few years ago, it would have been impossible for them to handle a situation like this. The main reason is because they always had to give away 60% of their hunt as taxes, so instead of making any equipment with the materials gotten from the boars, they were forced to trade everything away to get by. However, with efficient hunting strategy, they've managed to gain more leeway when it comes to their allocation of materials, and with the improved equipment, they are more than capable of handling two at once. Within a few minutes, the remaining boars are dealt with, and Cecile regains consciousness just in time to see the blood geyser from one of the boars, which promptly knocks her out again. Granville is impressed that they managed to take down 3 boars in just one day because that means they only have to hunt 17 more to fill the quota, but Alan corrects him and explains that they only actually need 10 more, because before Granville decided to pay them a visit, they had already captured 7 other boars. The Baron is glad to hear that because it means the quota won't be as much of a burden on the village as he had thought, and while the Baron is in a good mood, Alan tells him he has a few requests to make. He says he would like permission to create a few more shields out of the boar hide to help with future hunts, and the Baron has no objections to that, but Alan's second request is to ask for permission to trade for liquor outside the village. Once again, the Baron isn't necessarily opposed to the idea, but he wonders why Alan is asking for liquor specifically. Alan explains that since filling the quota has required them to hunt for more meat than they otherwise would, there have been concerns that the influx of extra meat would cause a crash in the overall value of the meat locally, which is why he wants permission to trade a good portion of it for alcohol to boost morale. Granville sees no reason to object, so he agrees to the requests and tells Alan that he has done a wonderful job as a guide today. As they are preparing to leave for the day, Cecile, who had been quiet for most of the hunt, yells at Alan and tells him not to get full of himself just because her father praised him a little, but as she says this, she nearly falls off her horse, which completely ruins the intimidating act she was trying to put on. A little while later, Alan, Rawdon and Gerda are all called over to Granville's mansion, and Granville tells them that he was so impressed with their performance the other day that he wants to give them a reward. Alan is excited because he can already tell what's coming, and a few moments later, Granville declares that Rawdon and Gerda, along with all their families, will be granted commerce status. Rawdon and Gerda can't believe it since they never expected something like this to happen, and Alan is overjoyed because now he gets to keep all that money he was saving, and he's allowed to leave the village without permission now, so the first thing he plans to do is head to the White Dragon Mountains when he gets the chance. Granville also adds that anyone who has participated in the hunts over the past 10 years will receive the same promotion, so he asks Rawdon and Gerda to provide a list of everyone who qualifies. After everything Granville has seen, he knows there should be no problems with fulfilling the quota requirements, so he says he can return to the capital and rest easy. However, his butler reminds him that there's actually one more thing he needs to do. It nearly skipped Granville's mind, but the king apparently wants to use Krena village as an example to the other villages in the kingdom since they have been doing so well lately, so he asks Rodden to tell him the backstory of how the hunts began. Rodden looks a bit uncomfortable after hearing this, so Gerda explains to Granville that the village's backstory is a bit of a sensitive subject for Rodden, so he offers to recount the details in Rodden's place. Gerda explains that around 13 years ago, 100 serfs moved onto the land as part of the king's reclamation decree, and they worked hard for 3 months to make the place livable, but just when things were finally starting to go their way, they were attacked by a giant boar, which destroyed all the food they had stored up for winter. There was no way they would survive till the next year if they didn't do something, so Rodden suggested that they should try hunting the boar for meat, and everyone agreed with him. They didn't have any weapons or equipment at the time. They attacked the boar with nothing but shovels and hoes, and miraculously, they were eventually able to defeat it. Granville is impressed by the story, but he doesn't understand why Rodden is so sensitive about it since it sounds like his initiative is what led to the boar hunts that made the village prosper. However, Gerda informs him that during that hunt, one of Rodden's close friends ended up dying, and Rodden has blamed himself for it ever since. Granville understands how Rodden must feel, and to make up for bringing up such a painful memory, he tells Rodden he is allowed to make any request he wants. Alan thinks this is great and tells Rodden he can ask for some high-quality liquor, but instead, Rodden asks the Baron to allow Alan to work on his estate, even if only as a simple hall boy. Alan internally freaks out after hearing this, because if he gets employed at the Baron's estate, he will have even less freedom than he already does, so he is hoping the Baron refuses Rodden's request. But to his dismay, Granville actually says Alan is too good to be a mere hall boy, so he will employ him as a fully fledged servant of the estate. Cecile is outraged by this since she can't believe a filthy serf is going to be allowed into the mansion, but her butler reminds her that Alan isn't a serf anymore because he was just promoted to a commoner. Alan really wants to find a way to back out of this, but Finn's Rodden seems really happy about the whole thing, so he would feel bad if he ruined it by turning down the offer now. The next day, Alan gets dressed for his first day as a servant at the Baron's estate, and though his family is happy for him, they are also really sad to see him go. Krena is especially upset about not getting to see Alan again, so Alan suggests they should spar one more time before he leaves, and that seems to cheer her up. As their battle begins, everyone watches expecting Krena to dominate Alan as usual, but this time, Alan dumped all his stat boosts into agility, and it made him quick enough to keep up with and even outpace Krena despite her being a sword lord. Eventually, Alan wins the duel by holding his sword to Krena's neck, and she is in shock because this is the first time she has ever lost, but Alan says they can just call this a draw, and they'll have a rematch in the future to decide the real winner. The time soon comes for Alan to leave, so everyone starts saying their goodbyes, and even Dogora shows up to give Alan a knife as a present before he leaves the village. After that, Alan's parents both walk Alan to the village gate, and along the way Rodden tells Alan that being a servant is only the first step for him, and if he works hard, he will definitely move up in life. They eventually arrive at the gate where the chief has already prepared a carriage to take Alan, Cecile, and the Baron back to the city. It's a little awkward in the carriage since Cecile won't even look at him, and he has nothing to say to Granville, but he is going to find a way to make it work. Thus, Alan's life as a servant at the Baron's estate officially begins, and since he is a similar age to Cecile, he is put in charge of taking care of her, which basically means he is required to listen to all her demands, no matter how unreasonable they may be. For example, she asks Alan to carry her on his shoulders so she can reach some fruit that's up in a tree, but after she gets the fruit, she realizes it tastes awful and blames Alan for not warning her about it sooner. She's not a bad person, but she is really annoying to have to deal with all day, though Alan can't say anything about it since that would be disrespectful. She tells Alan to go buy some delicious fruit from the market for her, and Alan agrees to do so, but just then, he notices a giant ship flying overhead, and he is amazed because he had no idea that this world had stuff like this. Cecil doesn't understand why Alan is so shocked and asks if this is his first time seeing a magic airship, but Alan really hasn't seen one of these before, so she decides to leave him be and just reminds him to buy the fruit for her once he's done here. The next morning, Alan wakes up in his living quarters, and while it may look like an old attic room, well actually, it is an old attic, but it's still a bit of an upgrade from Alan's old room. He has used his summoning skills to grow some grass plants with recovery-boosting aroma, so he always starts his days feeling fresh and energized. That said, he's still really hungry, so he decides to head downstairs for breakfast. In the dining hall, all the other servants are already eating, and over the past few days of working here, Alan has gotten to know them pretty well, especially the head servant, Rickle. When Rickle sees Alan, he asks him if he has been getting along well with Cecile, and Alan says yes, but Rickle can tell by looking at his face that she's been rough on him. He explains Cecil is only asking so much of him because he's a servant instead of a hallboy, but Alan has no idea what the difference is. Rickle explains that servants of the family are split into senior and junior ranks, but they are all still technically considered to be part of the family. However, hallboys are different because they are only temporary helpers of the family, so they aren't considered members of the family. Alan is surprised because he had no idea that becoming a servant here made him a member of the family, though now that he thinks about it, it does make sense why his dad was so overjoyed when the Baron made the offer. Later that day, Alan and a few other servants serve the Baron's family breakfast, and the Baron's wife is quite impressed by how well-mannered Alan is despite his humble upbringing. The Baron is also impressed that Alan is so skilled despite the fact that he is talentless, and though the part about him being talentless isn't true, Alan decides to just go along with it. As soon as Cecil finds out that Alan is talentless, she begins bragging about how she has the wizard as talent and her older brother has the swordsman talent, but Cecil's father yells at her to stop bragging about talent in front of her brother because it's a sensitive topic for him. Cecil's younger brother, Thomas, has always felt inferior because he doesn't have a talent, so hearing Cecil brag about it like that made him tear up, and Cecil feels really guilty for making him upset, but she still somehow finds a way to blame Alan for it. Later on, Alan has the afternoon off from work, so he decides to head into town, and his first stop is the Adventurers Guild because that's his #1 goal. He walks up to the front desk and asks the receptionist if he can register as an adventurer here. She explains that she can help him register, but first she needs to ask how old he is. Alan informs her that he is 8 years old, but unfortunately, she tells him that the minimum age to register as an adventurer is 12, so he isn't allowed to become one. Alan is devastated to hear this since he doesn't want to have to continue being a servant for 4 years, but since there's nothing else he can do for today, he decides to head to the notice board to gather some intel. At the board, he notices all kinds of monsters with different ranks posted with bounties, but a few moments later, an adventurer named Raven walks up to him and says, this isn't a place for a kid like Alan, so he had better leave. Alan apologizes and agrees to leave, but before he does, he asks Raven why bounties are organized that way. Raven explains that monsters get stronger the further away from the city you get, so naturally, some of the strongest monsters are located in the White Dragon Mountain. Alan then notices a really old bounty on the wall of the White Dragon, so he asks why no one has taken it out yet even though the reward is so good. Raven explains that the White Dragon is simply way too strong for anyone to beat, but there's a ton of mithril growing in that area, so there are still tons of requests for it and the bounty keeps getting higher and higher. All that information was really helpful, so Alan thanks Raven and heads on his way. He can't register himself as an adventurer yet, but that doesn't mean he can't fight monsters, and since this is his day off, he plans to make the most of it. He runs straight to the city gate, where he is stopped by a guard. Normally, people aren't allowed to leave the city without permission, but since Alan is technically a member of the Granville family, he is allowed to use their seal as identification, and that pretty much grants him access to wherever he wants to go. As soon as the guard opens the gate, he rushes out into the forest so he can start hunting monsters, but he doesn't want to be too careless, so he decides to start slow. Since monsters get stronger the farther into the forest you go, he only walks a few kilometers out so the monsters in the area will have an average of D rank. Once he arrives at ideal location, Alan summons a hawk, and since the hawk has high intelligence, it is smart enough to understand Alan's commands, so he summons 5 more and orders them to fly into the air and track down any monsters in the area. While he's waiting for the hawks to find something, he decides to evaluate the intelligence of his tiger summon, but while it is obedient to him, it doesn't really understand Alan's commands, so it can only do so much. Just then, a hawk comes back to inform Alan that it has located a few monsters, and after following the hawk, Alan is led to a horde of goblins. The goblins notice him hiding behind a tree, so they all rush out to attack him, but Alan was prepared for this and summons 10 tigers to surround them, and for good measure, he summons a butterfly to cast a sleep spell on the goblins to make it easier to finish them off. Killing goblins doesn't earn him as much XP as killing a boar would, but a key benefit here is the fact that taking the goblins out is a lot quicker than taking a boar out, so Alan can farm them to his heart's content. By nightfall, Alan has hunted around 80 goblins, earning himself 16,000 experience points and allowing him to go up by 2 levels. He is really pleased with how his day off went, because not only did he level up, he also learned a lot about his summons. For example, the butterfly's sleep spell has an 80% chance of successfully putting a goblin to sleep, and D-rank magic stones can't be used to create E-rank summons, even though they are more valuable. Anyway, even though it's late, Alan wants to keep farming, so he asks the hawks to go look for more monsters to fight, but they all just kind of stare at him without moving. Alan asks what's wrong, and that's when he finds out that the hawks aren't capable of seeing well at night, so they won't be able to scout monsters for him anymore. That's a huge bummer for Alan since he still wanted to hunt a little more, but he's got bigger problems to deal with right now because he was planning to rely on the hawks to help him find his way back to the city. And if they can't see anything in the dark, then that means he is pretty much lost in the woods, but he can't spend the night out here, so he is forced to stumble through the dark until he eventually makes it back home. A month later, Alan commissions a blacksmith to make 3 metal balls for him since he has been meaning to find a way to make his rock-throwing skill more effective, and these are perfect. So after paying for the balls, he tosses them into his grimoire's storage. Over the past month, Alan has gone hunting 4 times, and thanks to his successful XP farming sessions, his level has risen all the way to 12, so he finally feels like he is making some progress. Later that night, he returns to the Granville estate, but as soon as he walks in, he is cornered by Seabass and told that the Baron wants to have a word with him. Alan heads to the Baron's office to meet with him, and he begins praising Alan because ever since he arrived, the others in the mansion have had nothing but good things to say about him. However, the Baron is a little concerned about what Alan does on his days off because he has been told that Alan leaves early in the morning and does not return until late into the night. Of course, the Baron tells Alan that he isn't in trouble because he is free to do whatever he wants with his days off, but he just wants to have an idea of what Alan is up to. Alan understands why the Baron would be suspicious of his behavior, so he decides to be completely honest and explains that he has been hunting in the forest on his days off. The Baron asks why Alan is doing it, so Alan explains that as the son of a hunter like Rodden, it is simply natural for him to want to hunt as well. The Baron can't argue with that, so he tells Alan he is free to continue hunting as much as he wants. However, there is one condition. Seabass assumes that Alan must be hunting E-rank rabbits since he doesn't know he is strong enough to handle D-rank goblins, so he tells Alan that he cannot sell the meat he catches to any of the local butchers since it could cause a scandal if it became public knowledge. Instead, Seabass offers to have the estate buy any meat Alan hunts at 1 silver coin per bundle, which is higher than the current market rate. Alan is overjoyed by this news, especially since till now, he had just been throwing away all the meat he gathered, so this will give him a chance to earn a little extra money. 6 months later, Alan is out in the forest on one of his weekly hunts, and today, he plans to kill at least 100 goblins and a few horned rabbits to bring back to the mansion. Just then, one of his hawks returns, and he assumes this must mean it has found more monsters, but then a moment later, the rest of the hawks return as well, and they all seem to be acting pretty strange, so Alan realizes something must be wrong. He decides to follow the hawks, even though he has no idea where they are leading him. But a moment later, he comes across Raven and his party in deep trouble against a horde of goblins. Raven is already down for the count, and with Rita being the only other fighter on the team, the situation isn't looking good for them, so Alan decides to join in to help. He throws his metal balls at a few of the goblins, but while it does a lot more damage than throwing stones does, it isn't enough to kill them outright, and he only had 3 pieces of ammo, so it wasn't as effective as he had hoped. Normally, he would be able to handle the goblins effortlessly by summoning a few tigers, but he doesn't want to use his powers in front of other people yet, so he is going to have to get his hands dirty. He charges at one of the goblins, and since he is level 12 now, he is a lot stronger than he used to be, so he can easily handle a D-rank goblin on his own without help from his summons. He then proceeds to take out a few more goblins in the time it takes Rita to kill one, and thanks to him, they are safe, but Raven's life is still in danger here. Rita begs Milsey to hurry up and heal Raven, but unfortunately, Milsey is already out of mana, so she can't use any more healing spells. With his current state, Raven won't survive long enough to make it back to town, so Alan offers to use some of the healing grass he made with his summon, and with it, Raven's wounds is completely healed. The others are overjoyed to see Raven wake up, and they all swear that they will repay Alan for the valuable healing herb he used on them, but Alan really doesn't want to draw too much attention to himself, but there is actually something he could use their help with. He tells them that he is currently collecting E-rank magic stones, so if they could gather around 100 for him, that would be a huge help. Raven and the others are surprised that that's all Alan wants since E-rank magic stones are pretty much worthless, but since he insists, Raven promises that they will have the stones ready for Alan by next week, and the two say their goodbyes. A few days later, Alan is back on the job as Cecil's servant, and she is currently having him give her a boost so she can reach a jar of jam. Alan asks her why she's doing this, so she explains to him that she wants to bake some yummy cookies to commemorate her brother Mihai's return, but Alan had no idea that Mihai was returning, and he is so shocked that he loses his balance, causing Cecil to fall over. A while later, the family is having lunch, and Granville is quite impressed by how tasty the meal is. Cecil is glad he likes it because it was made with some of the horned rabbits that Alan hunted. Granville is impressed by Alan's skill, but that much should be expected from the son of a warrior like Rodden. Granville also mentions that Krena village has met the quota of 20 boars for the year, and Alan is glad to hear that, but he never had a doubt in his mind that they would be able to pull it off. Just then, Thomas asks why they haven't gotten to eat any boar meat if the quota was met, since it used to be the highlight of their winter meals. They haven't had any this year. Alan is surprised to learn of this, but he assumes it must be because the king is the one who requested the quota increase, so all the boar meat must have been sent to the capital. Thomas asks Alan if he can hunt a white deer for lunch next time, but everyone starts yelling at him to not make such an unreasonable request of Alan, since hunting a white deer is no small feat. However, to their surprise, Alan agrees to do it without hesitation. He has been eager to try a new challenge lately, and he assumes a white deer must be somewhere around C rank, so it should be easy. The next day, Alan heads out into the forest, and after digging a pit in the snow, he proceeds to run into the forest to track down a white deer. Once he finally spots one, he summons 4 frogs to act as bait. Using their provoked skills, the frogs easily grab the deer's attention, causing it to charge at them, but when it was about to hit the frogs, Alan desummoned them and then resummoned them at a different location. This goes on for a bit until Alan eventually leads the deer straight into the hole he dug for it, and now that it is trapped, there's nothing stopping Alan from killing it. An hour later, the staff at the mansion goes into a panic because a giant white deer just showed up at the front gate, but just as they are about to attack it, they hear a voice coming from underneath, and a moment later, Alan rolls out from under the deer. Killing it was easy, and it did give him over 2000 XP, but it was a serious pain in the butt to carry all the way back here by himself. He asks the other servants to go call Thomas because he hunted this deer specifically for him, and a moment later, the entire family comes out to see what's going on, and Granville is shocked to see that Alan really did hunt a deer. Thomas is delighted since this means they will be able to have deer meat for New Year's, but the rest of the family is still in shock over the whole thing. Granville is starting to wonder if Alan is really talentless, because there's no way a normal 8-year-old should be capable of taking down a C-rank monster on his own, so he plans to have Alan reassessed as soon as possible. A little while later, Alan is called into a meeting with Seabass where he is informed that he is going to be promoted to a huntsman. As part of his duties as a huntsman, Alan will be expected to hunt food for the household, as well as protect the people in the event of a monster attack, and as payment, he will receive 100 silver coins a month, which is twice his current salary. This may seem like a great deal on the surface, but Alan can tell that they are just trying to get out of having to pay full price for any strong monsters he catches, because that deer alone was worth more than 100 silver, and paying Alan his salary is much cheaper than paying for the monsters he hunts directly. Alan doesn't really mind losing out on the extra money as long as it means he can hunt as much as he wants, but just when he's about to leave to start hunting right away. Seabass tells him to wait because he's still required to do his normal duties as Cecil's servant, so he's only allowed to hunt once a week. Alan is really disappointed to hear that, but it would be rude to complain, so he just sucks it up and goes along with it. A little while later, Alan goes to the port with Cecil to meet Mihai since he is finally coming home from the academy to visit. This is the first time Alan has seen an airship so close up, so he is quite curious about how it works, but Cecil is much more interested in greeting her brother as soon as he steps out. She runs over to Mihai and hugs him tight, telling him all about how much she missed him. She asks why he didn't come home last summer like he promised he would, and Mihai does remember making that promise, but something came up, so he apologizes for disappointing her. Alan walks up to Mihai and offers to carry his bags while Cecil introduces him as her servant. Mihai is a nice guy, and just by taking one look at Alan, he can tell that he's quite talented, so he tells him as much. Alan is relieved that Mihai is so mature, because he wouldn't be able to handle another Cecil. But Cecil and Mihai seem to get along really well as family, and it makes him wonder how his own family is doing. Later that day, Alan is out hunting a few monsters for lunch, and by the time he's done, the chefs are overjoyed because these are the freshest ingredients they've ever gotten, and they are very thankful for Alan's hard work. But just as he was about to put the meat away, he noticed Mihai and Xenoph dueling in the garden. Even though Mihai is only 14 years old, he is still quite impressed, especially since he is able to hold his own against someone like Xenoph, but the strength gap is still too wide, so Mihai ultimately ends up losing. Everyone praises Mihai for doing such a good job, but then Cecil notices Alan carrying his quarry for the day, and she compliments him on such a good catch. It is undoubtedly impressive that Alan was able to defeat a monster like that, and since they've got a little extra time to kill, Mihai asks Alan if he would like to spar as well. Xenoph looks to Granville to see if he approves, and since Granville has no problem with it, Xenoph hands Alan his sword so he can fight. Alan is really excited since this is his first time holding a mithril sword, and it has been ages since he did any sparring, so he can't wait. Right now, his stats are optimized for hunting, not combat, but with all the level increases he has been getting lately, he is sure his current build should be able to handle this. The duel begins, and Alan initially tries holding back to avoid hurting Mihai, but as his sword clashes with Mihai's for the first time, Alan realizes something. This dude is strong. Mihai has spent several years training and studying in the Royal Academy, and all those years of experience play a crucial role in combat, so even if Alan is similar to him in terms of strength, his swordsmanship is still novice level at best, so he never stood a chance. Once the duel is over, everyone once again starts praising Mihai's strength, but Cecil does praise Alan as well, since he held up pretty well against Mihai for a while. Thomas asks Mihai how he got so strong, so Mihai explains that he was forced to clear a dungeon as a summer project last year, and that experience made him a lot stronger. Cecil realizes that's probably why Mihai wasn't able to visit last summer, and she feels kind of bad for him, but Alan is busy thinking about how amazing the training Mihai receives at the academy must be. Cecil asks Mihai whether he's to stay for a while, but unfortunately, he has to head back to the academy in a few days, and he won't be back until summer next year. Alan suddenly asks Mihai to spar with him when he next returns, and Mihai accepts his request. He then shakes Alan's hand and asks him to take care of Cecil until then, and Alan is forced to agree, but internally, he's thinking about the quickest way to get out of this stupid job without dishonoring his father. A little while later, Viscount Carnell shows up to pay Granville a visit, and he makes some snide remarks about this being a backwater town, which Granville laughs off. But it's clear that these two absolutely hate each other. Alan serves Carnell his meal, and Carnell is delighted because he thinks this is the famous boar meat that Granville had been keeping all to himself, but in reality, it's just the horned rabbit Alan hunted. However, Carnell can't really tell the difference. The Carnell and Granville families have been at odds with one another for centuries at this point, and right now, the Carnell territory is doing really well, while the Granville territory is on an economic downturn. The reason for this is the fact that both territories are located on either side of the White Dragon Mountain. The mountain contains a lot of mithril, so both regions have several mines in the mountain, but the dragon on top of the mountain is currently roosting on the Granville side, so they can't use their mines, which is why their economy took such a huge hit. Though, it hasn't always been like this. The dragon is very fickle about its roosting spot, so roughly every 100 years, it switches sides, which flips the power dynamics between the two sides. Anyway, Granville asks Carnell why he came here since this couldn't have been a pointless visit, and Carnell was so preoccupied with his food that he nearly forgot to mention it, but he says his oldest daughter recently underwent her appraisal, and he wanted to personally share the news. Alan assumes Carnell's daughter must have gotten an amazing talent, so he is here to rub it in Granville's face, but to his confusion, Carnell announces that his daughter is talentless, and what makes it even more confusing is the fact that Carnell mockingly reminds Granville that 2 out of his 3 children have talents. Granville gets angry and points out that Carnell also has an older son who has a talent, so that means both of them are going to have to fulfill a noble's duty someday. After that, Carnell leaves, and Alan has no idea what that whole thing was about, but it did teach him that being a noble isn't as much fun as he thought. Sometime later, on one of his days off, Alan meets with the party he helped and asks them for advice because he's thinking about hunting a few C-rank monsters. After all, he has hunted over 10,000 goblins in the forest already, and farming D-ranks really isn't doing it for him anymore. The group warns Alan that C-rank monsters are a lot more dangerous than what he's used to, and Alan is aware of that, which is why he wants to learn everything he can from them before going on his next hunt. Later on, Alan is out in the forest when one of his birds spots a C-rank monster and rushes over to come call him. Alan goes to investigate and finds an orc sleeping under a tree, and this is a perfect opportunity to attack, so he proceeds to jump the orc with a horde of tigers. The orc tries to fight back, but Alan has way too many summons for it to stand a chance, so it eventually succumbs. With the orc dead, Alan carves into its body to retrieve its magic stone, and he's really proud of himself for being able to take down a C-rank monster without needing to trap it first, but he reminds himself that he needs to stay humble because he's still not strong enough to beat Mihai, so he can't make the mistake of getting overconfident. Just then, one of his birds alerts him to another C-rank monster nearby, and this one seems to be an armored ant. Alan is a little hesitant to fight it since he recalls that Raven once nearly died to one of these, but it's a little too late to back out now because the ant has already seen him. Alan has no choice but to attack, so he sends out his tigers, but they aren't able to pierce through the ant's armor, so Alan needs to think of something else. He decides to try using his butterfly summons to put the ant to sleep, and once it rolls over, he jumps on its belly in an attempt to kill it, but his knife won't go through even though his attack power is over 400. The ant soon starts waking up, so Alan frantically starts stabbing it over and over until he finally breaks through its shell and kills it. He's glad that's finally over, but even though the ant was C-rank just like the orc, it took way more effort because it's pretty much immune to physical attacks. He wonders if it would have been easier if he could use magic, but now that he thinks about it, he has a really high intelligence stat, so he might be able to cast spells after all. To find out, he asks Cecil to let him join her during her magic class, and while there, he asks the teacher if it's possible for him to use magic. The teacher pulls out a magic orb and tells Alan it will light up if he has a talent for magic. Alan gives it a try, but no matter how hard he concentrates, nothing happens. He is forced to come to terms with the fact that he's completely magicless, and he's taking it really hard, so Cecil feels bad for him and offers Alan a cookie to cheer him up. One day, while the family is having dinner, Rickles suddenly barges into the dining hall to warn them all that a murdergelsh has been spotted in the area, and at its current pace, it will arrive at the southern gate in less than 2 hours. This is terrible news, so Granville asks if they can get Xenoff to deal with it, but unfortunately, Xenoff and his knights are currently away on a monster hunting mission, and they won't be back for at least 2 days, so they are on their own. Granville orders Rickle to go to the Adventurers Guild and put out a quest to get as many people as possible to defend the city, and in the meantime, Alan volunteers to hold the Murdergelsh off. The Murdergelsh is a B-rank monster, and Alan knows that the adventurers in this town stand no chance of beating it, so it's up to him to protect them. Unfortunately, he already used up all of his MP this morning since he was farming XP, so he needs to wait until he has recovered a sufficient amount to use his summoning ability. The people of the city have all been warned of the impending attack, so they are all running for their lives, and Alan happens to overhear a man pleading with an adventurer to save his wife and daughter because they got stuck in their carriage, the same one that the Murdergelsh is currently chewing on. The mother and daughter inside are terrified, because it's only a matter of time before they are devoured, but Alan refuses to let that happen, so he takes one of his iron balls and throws it right at the monster's eye. This successfully draws the monster's attention away from the family, but now the monster is focused on Alan instead, so he takes off running and tries to lead the monster towards the mountain to keep the city safe. As he is running, his MP is restored, so he uses it to reset his summon roster and stock up on butterflies because those give him speed and agility boosts. He then summons a bunch of them and tries to use their magic to put the monster to sleep, but the Murdergelsh seems to be resistant to sleep magic, so instead of passing out, it becomes angry and swats all the butterflies away, which leaves Alan with very few options to work with. Late into the evening, Alan is still running away from the Murdergelsh, and he is starting to tire out, but fortunately, he manages to hide under some trees in order to give the monster the slip, and once he is sure that he is safe, he collapses near a tree and breathes a sigh of relief because he wasn't sure he would make it out of that one alive. He's got no idea why the debuffs didn't work, and he's nowhere near strong enough to beat that thing without weakening it first. He even had to use up a bunch of his magic stones just to survive long enough to make it out here, but at least he successfully led it far away from the city, so the people should be safe now. He plans to just head home and wait for Xenoff to return so he can deal with the Murdergelsh, but just as he was about to leave, he senses something staring at him, and to his horror, it turns out that the Murdergelsh has found him. He takes off running, but the monster has no intention of giving up hunting Alan, so he ends up running day and night trying to escape. 3 days later, Alan finally manages to shake off the monster and make it back to the city, but after being forced to run non-stop all for days, he is tired, hungry, and on the verge of collapse. The city guard sees him coming and recognizes Alan as the hero who sacrificed himself for the city a day ago, so he rushes over to catch him, and by the time Alan opens his eyes again, he is back at the mansion with Seabass and Cecile looking after him. Cecile is really happy that Alan is alright, but she also yells at him for making her worry like that, which Alan kind of expected from her. Seabass asks Alan if he remembers anything, so Alan tells him that the monster was relentless and chased him for 3 whole days before he lost it, and once the coast was clear, he turned back to return to the city. Seabass is impressed by Alan's bravery, and he informs him that Granville is just as pleased with what he has done, so after Alan is back on his feet, he would like to meet with him. A little while later, Alan goes to meet Granville, and he explains that he wasn't strong enough to defeat the monster on his own, so he decided to draw its attention and lead it as far away as possible. He then apologizes for doing something so reckless, but Granville tells Alan that he has nothing to be sorry for. Handling monsters like the Murdergelsh would have been impossible without Xenoff and his knights, so Alan's brave actions undoubtedly saved the city from mass casualties. Which is why rewards have been prepared for Alan in the amount of 10 gold coins from Granville, and another 10 gold coins from the family that he saved that day. Alan is overjoyed because with that kind of money, he could definitely buy himself a decent sword, and that's exactly what he does, because the next time we see him, he's rocking a mithril sword. With this, he is easily able to defeat an armored spider on his own, but it's still not hard enough to pierce through the spider's hard abdominal armor. That said, it is capable of piercing through the gaps in the armor, so Alan is able to dig into the spider's body and take the magic stone. Now that he's done with that, he wants to run a little test with his summons, so he calls over 3 of his hawks, has 2 of them land, and then stores one in his grimoire. He then places a fruit in a bag and asks the hawk in front of him to point to the item that he put in the bag. The first hawk easily identifies the fruit, but Alan already expected that, so he moves on to the next step of the test and resummons the second hawk. He then asks the hawk the same question, and it immediately identifies the fruit, which tells Alan that different summons of the same type can share information with one another. He then calls the third hawk down and asks it to do the same thing, but this time, it can't answer the question, so the information relay must only work on hawks that are still inside the grimoire. Some time goes by, and in early March, Cecil's brother returns once again, so he gives Alan the rematch he requested. Alan has gotten a lot stronger after farming all those C-rank monsters, but he's still struggling to keep up with Mihai's raw skill. The match ultimately ends with Alan's loss, and Xenov congratulates Mihai for an excellent display of skill, and Alan congratulates him as well, but inside, he is seething with rage because he doesn't understand what kind of training Mihai has been doing at the academy to get this strong. After the duel is over, they all head to the dining room for lunch, and there, Mihai learns that Alan recently fought a murdergelsh. Alan explains it's a bit of a stretch to call what a fight, since all he did was run away, but Mihai is still impressed that Alan made it out of that alive because even he wouldn't be able to beat a B-rank monster like that. Just then, a knight barges into the dining room, and Alan is a little concerned since it didn't end well for him last time this happened, but to everyone's surprise, the knight comes bearing good news. He informs Granville that the white dragon on the mountain has begun to migrate towards Carnell's territory, so this means they will finally be able to use their mithril mines again. Granville is overjoyed because this will be the start of an economic boom for his territory, and he is so excited that he wants to send knights to go inspect the mines at once. However, Xenov tells him to hold on a minute, because it would be better to figure out where exactly the dragon's new nest will be located before making moves to restore the mines. Granville agrees with him, so he decides to go with Xenov's plan, but then Mihai chimes in and asks if this means he is going to need to clear out all the monsters in the region between the city and the mines, because if so, he would like to help out a little since he's still got some free time, and he could use something to pass the time. However, Xenov turns him down because he thinks it's too risky. After all, if the white dragon were to return for some reason during the hunt, Mihai would be in serious danger. Mihai understands his point, so he agrees to back down, but the same can't be said for Alan, because he knows that if he doesn't do something soon, then after the knights have cleared out all the monsters to make way for the mine, he will lose his valuable XP farming ground, so he plans to as much as possible before that happens. The first chance he gets, he heads deep into the forest, and he recently hit level 5 with his summoning skill, so he is eager to test out his new abilities. For one, he recently unlocked the new share skill, so he summons a hawk and decides to try it out. He activates the share ability, and all of a sudden, Alan is able to share the hawk's point of view to look at himself. He thinks this is amazing and asks the hawk to fly into the air because he wants to see what it looks like, and as it obeys his order, Alan is treated to a first-class view of the world from the skies. With an ability like this, Alan will be able to perform recon missions with ease, especially since Hawk's Eagle Eye ability can also be activated to improve vision. Seeing how well the vision sharing works, this gets Alan curious about how many summons he can share senses with, so he decides to test that out as well. He summons 3 more hawks and activates the share skill on them, so now he is able to see the point of view of all 3 hawks, along with his own POV. This is really cool, almost like a split-screen monitor, but Alan wants to see how far he can take it, so he summons a tiger and activates the skill on it as well, but as he is about to try adding one more tiger, a sharp pain rips through his head and he is forced to cancel the share skill in order to get rid of the splitting headache. Since having 6 POVs at once caused him physical pain, Alan assumes that 5 must be his limit and is almost certain that it is linked to his intelligence stat. His intelligence is currently just over 1000, so the share skill must require 200 points per point of view to avoid being overwhelmed. Alan had initially planned to spend time playing around with all his new summons, but right now, he is more interested in seeing how far he can push his intelligence, so he calls on one of his new summons, an owl, and using the intelligence boost it grants to raise his intellect stat to over 1200. Now he is able to use 8 POVs with no problem, and he soon realizes that if he can remotely see what his summons are doing and give them orders, then he can farm XP without actually having to do any work. To test out his theory, he summons a bunch of his new creatures and has them work together to take down a group of armored ants, and sure enough, they easily make short work of the ants. With this, Alan won't have to worry about losing his excuse to hunt, so he gives his summons orders and warns them to never attack human adventurers, even if the adventurers attack them first, because he would rather not be responsible for a homicide. After that, he prepares to leave the forest, but just then, he comes to the realization that there is one more way he could apply his shared vision. He sends one of his birds all the way back to Krina village to check up on everyone, and through its eyes, he can see that they are all doing well. Krina and the others are training, Rodden is working in the fields, and his mom is braiding his little sister's hair. It is a relief to see their faces again, even if it's only through the bird, and he plans to visit in person eventually, but for now, Alan has the birds set down a gold coin for them before leaving. 6 months go by, and Xenoph and his knights have been making steady progress with reclaiming the mines, but unfortunately, Xenoph informed Granville that it's going to take a lot longer than expected because during the time that the Mithril mines were left untouched, they became overrun with monsters, and on top of that, the surrounding villages which had acted as Mithril refineries have also been overrun with monsters. He estimates that it will take at least 3 years to reclaim all of those regions. Granville is shocked to hear this, so he desperately asks Xenoph to try to get it done as soon as possible because he can't wait that long. Alan finds it a little odd that Granville is being so impatient, but then he overhears Granville asking Xenoph if he has any intel on what Carnell has been up to these past few months. As far as Xenoph knows, Carnell attempted to continue mining even though the dragon had moved back over to his side, and ultimately, the entire mining crew suffered for it because they were burnt to ash as soon as the dragon spotted them. It is unlikely that Carnell will be able to continue his mining operations as things are now, but Granville asks Xenoph to remain on high alert because there's no telling what trick Carnell might pull this time. Alan doesn't really understand what they're talking about, but he doesn't particularly care because over the past 6 months, he has been farming XP with his monsters non-stop, and after he turns 12, he plans to quit being a servant here and go register as an adventurer, though that's still 2 years from now, so until then he plans to continue taking out as many monsters as he can before the knights clear them out. To that end, as soon as Alan gets a chance, he heads out into the forest and locates a village that has been overrun with goblins. Normally, he would leave the goblin village intact and let them respawn so he can farm XP more efficiently, but he has seen Goblin Slayer, so he knows all about the messed up stuff goblins do out here. If he doesn't deal with them himself, then they end up hurting more people later on, which is why he's not going to hold back at all. He uses his bear summons to block off all the exits to the village and corners the goblins inside, and once there's nowhere left for the goblins to run, the bears begin mauling them. Soon after, the Goblin King comes out to fight, and normally, this would qualify as a boss fight, but Alan and his summons are way too over-level for this to even be considered a challenge, so a few minutes later, every goblin in the area has been dealt with. By the end of it all, Alan earns almost 50,000 XP, and he plans to go around destroying every single goblin's camp in the area, so he's going to earn a lot more XP. Sometime later, Mihai graduates from the academy, so it's time for him to return and live with his family. However, to Alan's surprise, the first thing Mihai does after getting off the airship is ask him for a no-holds-barred duel. Alan has no reason to say no, so he agrees to the duel, and after returning home, they both square up with one another. Alan plans to give this all he's got, so he puts all his stat boosts into speed and strength, and as the duel begins, he immediately closes the distance with Mihai. Mihai is honestly shocked by how fast Alan is now compared to the last time they fought, but despite Alan's improvements, Mihai is still able to hold his ground because he has the strength and skill advantage. Alan does his best to keep fighting, but before long, Mihai successfully disarms him, so he is yet again lost. Alan accepts defeat, but as he raises his hand to congratulate Mihai, Mihai silently walks past him and up to Granville. Granville says he is proud to see how strong Mihai has grown over his years at the academy, and he says he is the pride and joy of the Granville family, which makes what he must do all the more heartbreaking. Mihai then walks up to Cecile and Thomas and tells them that he has some bad news. He says he has to fulfill the duty of a noble, so he is going to be gone for quite a while. Cecile is disappointed to hear that and asks Mihai what he is going to be doing, but unfortunately, Mihai isn't allowed to share that information. He assures her that he will be back in 3 years. Hearing that Mihai is going to be gone for so long just makes Cecile feel even worse because she was looking forward to spending time with him. Alan has very little context for this situation, but from what he can tell, a noble's duty must be some horrible task that every gifted noble is required to undertake at a certain age. Kind of like how we all have to go cave diving alone with no gear one day, truly tragic. The next day, Mihai is set to leave to fulfill his duty, and after saying goodbye to his family, he heads toward his carriage. As he is about to step inside, he leans in close to Alan and begs him to watch over Cecile for him while he is gone, and Alan just instinctively agrees. After that, Mihai leaves, and Alan is a little curious about the whole noble's duty thing, but not so curious that he is willing to go snooping around, so he just lets it go. A year later, Alan has made some significant progress in his quest to eradicate all goblin camps in the forest, and he decides to move on to orc camps now. Orcs may be stronger than goblins, but overall, it's not that much of a challenge for Alan and his summons. They all coordinate well to deal with the orcs' attack, and Alan is really happy with how well things are going, but he does wish there were some way for him to tell how much health his summons had left in reserve, because while they may be able to fight without getting tired, if the damage they take passes a certain threshold, they just disappear without warning. Though in a situation like this, it's not a huge problem since Alan could always just summon more monsters. The battle seems to be going pretty well for Alan, but all of a sudden, he spots a spell headed his way, so he scrambles and asks his 2 knights to protect him. They successfully block the attack, but Alan still wonders where the magic came from in the first place, so he looks back and spots 3 orcs wielding magic scepters. This is the first time Alan has gone up against an opponent capable of wielding magic, and he's got to admit that it really sucks. Those fireball spells do a lot of damage, so if those orcs keep attacking, then it's only a matter of time before Alan's army gets decimated. He can't have that, so he takes out a steel ball and hurls it straight at one of the orcs, blowing a hole clean through its head. Alan is overjoyed to find out that he's strong enough to one-hit KO these idiots, but before he could throw his second steel ball, he realizes that the other orcs have started hiding behind the rocks to avoid getting obliterated, so maybe they're a little smarter than Alan gave them credit for. One of the orc mages goes running over to the orc king to inform him of what's going on, and meanwhile, outside, the full force of the orc army comes bearing down on Alan. There are a lot more of them than Alan was expecting, but he's got a ton of D-rank magic stones in supply after his goblin genocide, so he can summon up to 20,000 bears if he wants to, and that's why he's sure he's going to win eventually. However, just as Alan was gaining control of the situation, the orc king suddenly makes an appearance. This one is a B-ranked monster, so it's going to be a significant challenge for Alan. He starts off by sending 2 bears out to fight it, but the orc king easily cleaves both of them with a single strike. Alan realizes he may have underestimated the power of a B-rank monster, so he decides to try summoning a few more bears to see if he can overwhelm it. Unfortunately, every time he summons more, they immediately get taken out by the orc king before they even have a chance to attack. Alan isn't going to be able to keep this up forever, and to make matters worse, he still has to deal with the remaining mages. Speaking of which, one of the mages launches a fireball right at Alan, and while he does manage to get his knights to block most of the damage, it is ultimately too much for them to handle, so they disappear, leaving Alan to deal with the extreme heat on his own. He gets blasted backward by another attack from the mages, and that costs him a significant amount of HP. He quickly heals himself with an HP potion and starts thinking of a way to handle the situation. But no matter how much he thinks about it, there's literally no way any of his summons can defeat the Orc King, so he's completely out of options. Just as he is about to give up and considers running away, Xenoph suddenly appears beside him. He says he heard all the commotion and came over as soon as he could to investigate. When he asks Alan what's going on, Alan explains that he was just trying to take out this orc camp when things kind of got out of hand. Alan then realizes that he can't let Xenoph see his summons, so he despawns them all. But to be honest, that probably looks even more suspicious, and he has no idea how he's going to explain it without blowing his cover. However, to his surprise, Xenoph doesn't question him about the summons at all, and simply says he's going to take care of the Orc King. While he's doing that, he tells Vice Captain Liebern to handle the Orc Mages. As Xenoph squares off against the Orc King, the monster swings down hard at him, but Xenoph easily parries the attack, all while remaining perfectly composed. Alan is amazed that Xenoph is capable of handling blows from an opponent that's twice his size, but Liebern tells him that this much is barely a warm-up for Xenoph, because he is known for being a powerhouse. Liebern then prepares to take out the Orc Mages before they can attack again. After locating them, he charges up his special ability and launches a piercing attack that leaves one of them looking like Toji after encountering the Honored One. He then finishes off the other Orc Mages, along with the rest of the Orc soldiers, in a similar fashion. Meanwhile, on Xenoph's side, he skillfully slices the Orc King in half in a matter of seconds. Later that night, Alan joins Xenoph back at the camp, and while having dinner, Xenoph mentions that shortly after Alan became a servant of the Granville estate, there were reports about monster carcasses appearing all over the forest. It wasn't difficult to narrow down who could have been responsible, and judging by how capable Alan is, Xenoph surmises that he isn't talentless after all. Alan realizes that his cover is blown, especially when Xenoph asks him if those monsters he was controlling are part of his abilities. It would be pointless for Alan to deny it now, but he also doesn't want to give away too much information because who knows what kind of trouble he would get into if he explains that the god of creation personally gave him this talent. Sometime later, Alan is back at the mansion when a group of royal messengers show up. The family all gather to see what the messengers are here for, but to Granville's horror, they hand him Mihai's diary and tell him that his son is dead. Granville can't believe this because it has only been 6 months, so it shouldn't have been possible for Mihai to die so soon unless they intentionally sent him out as cannon fodder because he was the son of a low-rank noble family. The royal messengers completely ignore Granville and walk out, since they have more bad news to deliver to other families, leaving everyone in the room devastated, especially Cecile, who can't believe her brother is really dead. Everyone in the mansion spends the day mourning Mihai because they all really cared about him, and they think it's cruel that a 15-year-old was forced to face such a harsh fate. But this is the way it has always been. Every so often, a noble family must offer up one of their gifted children into service, and more often than not, they end up dying. Cecile can't bear such a harsh reality, so while no one is looking, she climbs out of her window and runs away, causing the entire mansion to go crazy looking for her, and Alan needs to find her before something bad happens. Cecile has made her way out into the city streets, and she has been running for so long that her legs are too tired to continue, so she crouches down and takes out the ribbon she got from Mihai, still refusing to believe that her brother is actually gone. One of Alan's owls has caught sight of her, so a few moments later, Alan arrives, and upon seeing him, Cecile asks if he's here to drag her back home, but Alan says he actually just plans to wait here with her until she feels better. Several minutes go by like this, and Cecile starts yelling at Alan to leave her alone already, but just then, her stomach begins growling because she hasn't eaten anything yet, so Alan reaches into his storage and pulls out an impromptu meal for her. Cecile has no idea where he got all this stuff from, but she's too hungry and grief-stricken to care right now, so she takes one of the fruits and starts eating. As she eats, tears begin to stream down her face as she recalls the words Mihai had written in his final letter. He knew he was going to be sent on a dangerous mission, and he had a strong feeling he would die on that mission, so he was absolutely terrified up until the moment of his death. Cecile is terrified as well, because she knows she's going to have to fulfill the noble's duties someday as well, and that means she's going to meet the same fate as Mihai. Alan understands why she's so upset about this, so he plainly asks her if she wants to run away with him. He says they can leave the city and travel to all sorts of places together so she won't have to fulfill the noble's duty, but she says that would never work because she still needs to attend the academy. Alan reminds her that the academy is still just a school at the end of the day, so she can just choose not to go if she doesn't want to, and hearing him say that, she realizes that she really does have a choice in the matter, as did Mihai. In Mihai's letter, he did talk about how he was scared of dying, but he also mentioned the fact that he wasn't doing it because it was an obligation or for the sake of his family, and he chose to go through with the duty to confront his own weakness, so no matter what the outcome may have been, he had no regrets. After coming to this realization, Cecile says she's finally ready to go home, and Alan is glad to hear that, so he gets up and prepares to leave, but then she tells him that her legs are too tired to walk all the way back, so she wants him to carry her, which slightly annoys Alan, but he does it anyway. On the way back home, Cecile thanks Alan for his advice because it really meant a lot to her, and he tells her it's no big deal. They eventually return to the mansion where Cecile's parents are nervously waiting for them at the gate. Her parents immediately rush over to check on her, and Granville assures her that there's no need to be worried about the noble's duty, because now that they've got their mithril mines back up and running, he will be able to get an exemption for Cecile by bribing the royal family so she won't have to do it. However, Cecile looks them dead in the eyes and says she doesn't want to run away from her responsibility, so she plans to fulfill her noble's duty when the time comes. Both parents are shocked to hear her say this, but they respect her decision, so they don't try to talk her out of it. 6 months go by after that, and Alan's life in the Granville household has gone back to normal, so Alan is out hunting as usual. All the orc camps in the area have been cleared out mostly thanks to Alan handling all the dirty work, and that means the mithril mining operations can resume. According to Xenoph, he thinks they should be able to get everything up and running by summertime, which is good news, but Granville is still rather worried about what Carnell will do, because he might decide to lash out now that his side can no longer benefit from the mithril mines, so it's best if they stay on guard. Now that Alan has taken care of most of the monsters in the forest, he sets his sights on the mountain itself, and apparently, Cecile had asked him to bring her along on his hunting trip, but Granville shut the idea down immediately. Alan would have liked to have a mage around for support, but he knows there's no way Cecile could ever make it all the way up a mountain like this, so it wouldn't have worked out. After climbing for a while, Alan comes across a nest of ants, and from what he knows about these monsters, there are probably a few thousand ants in that nest, with a B-rank queen who gives birth to even more every now and then. The entrance to the nest is quite small, so only one ant can leave at a time, and Alan knows he would get swarmed if he went in there to fight right now, so he decides to bottleneck the ants and dwindle their numbers before heading inside to fight the queen. With the entrance now clear, Alan summons a few owls to head inside and scout the interior of the tunnel so he can find the queen, and as they fly through the tunnels, Alan's grimoire creates a detailed map of every single path in there. At one point, Alan comes across an egg incubation room, which is probably the main reason there were so many ants in here in the first place, and he doesn't want to risk hatching early, so he plans to circle back to take care of them after he has dealt with the queen. Several hours go by, and the sun is about to set, but Alan still hasn't found the queen ant yet, and he's starting to wonder if he should just call it a day and head home, but if he does that, then the soldier ants would probably have respawned by the time he comes back. He doesn't want to go on another month-long farming session, so he decides to power through the hunt tonight, and his resilience ends up paying off because one of his owls finally located the ant queen in one of the tunnels. The second Alan receives the info about the queen's whereabouts, he pulls up with his entire army, and the first order of business is to take out all the soldier ants protecting the queen before dealing with her. The soldier ants were easy enough for Alan's bears to handle, but when it comes to the queen itself, the bears get one shot. Fortunately, the queen's abdomen is completely exposed, so each bear is able to land a solid bite on the queen's body before they get defeated, so Alan keeps summoning more, and over time, the queen finally succumbs to the constant damage. Alan is relieved that the battle is finally over, but it's already way too late for him to start heading back to the city now, so he decides to camp out in the cave for the night and head back in the morning, but just as he's about to set up camp, he notices some mithril on the ground nearby. The next day, Alan returns to the Granville estate with the shell of the queen ant in tow, and he informs everyone of what he accomplished, but they're honestly having a hard time believing his story. Defeating soldier ants is one thing, but even the Knight's Order doesn't have the resources necessary to challenge an entire ant colony and defeat a queen. Alan understands why they are all skeptical since he wouldn't have been able to do it without his summons, and the only one here who knows about his summons is Xenoph. Granville asks Xenoph for his opinion on the matter, and Xenoph can't really confirm if this is actually a queen ant shell or not since he has never seen one himself. But then Alan remembers the mithril he found in the cave, so he pulls it out as undeniable proof that he ventured into a cave in the White Mountains. Seeing this transforms everyone's doubt into amazement because they now realize that Alan was telling the truth, so Granville tells him to come inside because he wants to hear about the whole thing in great detail. Of course, Alan doesn't reveal the truth about his summons, but he does explain where he found the cave and present the map he created of the cave's layout. Granville is more than happy with the information Alan provided because not only did he clear out the cave, but the fact that he found mithril in there means it must be an undiscovered mithril vein, and since Alan is the one who discovered it, Granville is rewarding him with 30% mining rights for that vein. Alan doesn't really know what that means, but Seabass tells him he doesn't need to worry about it too much. All he needs to know is that in a few years, he's going to be very rich. So more time passes and Alan is now 12 years old. The mithril mining operations have officially begun, but infrastructure for Alan's new vein hasn't been built yet, so it's going to take a little while longer for him to start getting paid. Now that he doesn't need to worry about money anymore, and he is old enough to register as an adventurer, he is considering quitting, but while he is in that train of thought, he suddenly overhears that the royal messenger is here again, and this time, Carnell is with him for some reason. Granville can tell that this probably isn't going to end well, but he still acts polite and asks what brings the messenger here today. The messenger says that Carnell recently brought up the fact that it was unfair that one region has to suffer the effects of the dragon while the other gets to benefit from the mithril mines, so he brought a contract that states that both territories will share the resources from the mithril mines from now on. In plain terms, this contract basically means Granville will be forced to hand over half of all his region's profits to Carnell for the next 100 years, and the messenger pressures him to sign right away. But Granville isn't an idiot, so he says he's going to have to meet with the king to discuss an agreement of this nature before he signs anything. Upon hearing this, the messenger gets up in a rage because he can't believe Granville would dare to question a contract he prepared, and he warns Granville that he will regret this as he storms out with Carnell as smug as ever in tow. You would think that would be the end of it, but you'd be wrong because not even a few days later, there is suddenly a huge commotion in the Granville mansion because a bunch of mercenaries have just broken into Cecile's room to kidnap her. Alan is the first to make it there, and he sees the kidnapper is about to run off with Cecile, so he draws his sword from his grimoire and charges at them. The big guy blocks Alan's strike, and he is certain that it will be easy to kill this kid so they can get out of here. But then Alan puts all of his stat boosts into strength, and all of a sudden, the big guy isn't so confident anymore. Alan probably could have defeated them if this was a fair fight, but one of the kidnappers pulls out a pouch of sleeping gas, and once Alan gets hit with it, he passes out moments later. The next time he opens his eyes, he finds himself tied up next to Cecile, which is a huge relief because it makes his job a lot easier. The kidnappers don't know about his summoning ability, and they can't see his grimoire either, so while he's facing the other way, he summons 2 birds on the ceiling so he can get a good view of the situation. The kidnappers are sitting behind him, and they haven't noticed that he's awake yet, so he plans to sneak attack them. However, as he's about to reach into his storage to pull out his sword, he realizes that he must have dropped his mithril sword when he was captured, so the only tools at his disposal right now are those metal balls and a regular sword. He isn't confident that he can defeat these guys while protecting Cecile with such limited equipment, so he decides to lay low for a while and scope out the area first. He sends one of his birds out to scout out the area, and he soon finds out that they are on a ship. But not just any ship, this is a magic airship, and a luxury one at that. There are a bunch of regular passengers dining in the main hall right now, and off to the side, Alan notices Carnell and the royal messenger laughing with each other over some wine. The royal messenger reminds Carnell that he has already pulled a lot of strings for him, so he expects to be compensated. Carnell tells him that if he is talking about the mining rights, he has already sent a threatening letter to Granville to make sure he hands over the rights, and if he still refuses, then Carnell plans to cut off Cecile's hand and use it as a more compelling threat. Alan is furious when he finds out that Carnell is the one behind all this, but back in the room where they are being held, Cecile finally wakes up, and she immediately starts freaking out. The kidnappers get annoyed by her flailing, so they plan to kick her a few times until she stops moving, but Alan's not about to let them beat Cecile up, so he decides to make his move. First, he summons a butterfly to put one of the kidnappers to sleep, and while the others are confused and wondering what just happened, Alan frees himself from the ropes and prepares to take them down. The kidnappers are about to attack, so Alan summons a bunch of his creatures to throw them off guard, and while the kidnappers are distracted, he proceeds to knock them out. He then walks over to Cecile to check on her, but just then, the leader comes back into the room, and he is slightly amused that Alan managed to take out his lackeys, but that doesn't mean he's getting out of here. All of a sudden, he appears right in front of Alan and kicks him in the stomach so hard that he gets slammed into a wall and coughs up blood. Alan is still trying to process what just happened because it looked like the leader had teleported, but first, he needs to take care of his injuries, so he uses one of his healing herbs. The leader can see that Alan is confused, so he explains that what he did just now was all thanks to his skill, but he doesn't think it's worth giving a whole explanation since he is going to kill Alan anyway. Just then, the leader hears the voice of Carnell yelling at him, and that startles him so much because he wasn't expecting Carnell to be in this room, but it turns out that it was just one of Alan's parrots. While the leader is distracted, Alan uses his spider to bind him to the ground, and then he grabs Cecile and makes a break for the door. The spider's silk won't hold the leader for long, so Alan also spawns 2 knights in front of the door to keep the leader busy and buy enough time for Alan to escape with Cecile. That said, there aren't really many options for escape as things stand, so Alan takes Cecile to a window and takes a look outside to see what he's working with. At a glance, it looks like they are roughly 100 meters up in the air, and Cecile is terrified because she can tell what Alan is thinking, but he tells her it's probably going to be fine because he just put all of his stats into endurance. There's not much time left, so Alan jumps out the window with Cecile, and as they come crashing to the ground, Alan absorbs most of the impact, so Cecile is perfectly fine, but Alan's legs are completely broken. Thankfully, he's still got a ton of healing herbs in stock, so he recovers fairly quickly, and once he is able to stand again, he extends a hand to Cecile and tells her it's time for them to go home. He frees her from her binds and gives her a healing leaf just to make sure she's alright, but Cecile understandably has a ton of questions on her mind, like what were those monsters she saw earlier, where did Alan get such a powerful healing herb, and how was he strong enough to jump out of an airship and survive? Those are all valid questions, but Alan doesn't have time to answer, because they are still in Carnell's territory right now, and Dogra is bound to come after them once the ship lands, so they need to get out of here as soon as possible. He tells Cecile to get on his back so he can carry her, which she does, but then he tells her to hold onto him tightly, and she refuses at first because she thinks it's embarrassing, but then Alan starts running, and he's a lot faster than she thought he would be, so she has no choice but to hold on tight. While running, Alan summons a few owls and asks them to scout around for him, and just as he expected, after the airship lands, Carnell orders Dogra to go looking for them, so they really need to move quickly. To Alan's surprise, Dogra starts heading in their exact direction off jump, which puts them in a really tough spot, so he decides to cut through a bunch of alleyways to test a theory and potentially lose Dogra, while the owls continue to watch Dogra's movements. Alan realizes that Dogra is following the exact same path that they took through those alleys, so he must have some kind of tracking skills that allow him to follow the footprints of his target. That means that as long as he can see the path Alan ran through, he will be able to follow him, but Alan has the perfect counter to that ability, so he jumps into the air and starts running across the rooftops, because there's no way Dogra would think to look for footprints on the roof. This should buy them more than enough time to get out of the city before he figures out what happened, but as Alan continues running, Cecile asks him why he didn't just fight Dogra back there since he is so strong. Alan explains that guys like Dogra are a bad matchup for him, so there's no guarantee that he would win a fight against him, especially not while having to protect Cecile, so escape is their best option. Alan eventually makes it up onto the city wall, and he explains to Cecile that they are going to have to go through the forest to make it back to the Granville territory, which will probably take a few days. However, Alan can't risk leaving any footprints near the city, so he creates a bunch of knights midair and begins hopping from shield to shield so he doesn't have to touch the ground. This way, Dogra will have no means of tracking them down, and once Alan has made it far enough away from the city, he sets up camp with Cecile. Just before bed, Cecile mentions how surprising it is that Alan has a talent after all, but she asks why he didn't tell anyone about it all this time. Alan explains that being talented would only invite trouble for him, so he didn't want to risk it, and considering what happened to Mihai, Cecile understands his reasoning. The next morning, Cecile gets back on Alan's back, and they continue their journey, but just to be safe, Alan checks back in on Dogra to see what he's up to. Dogra looks confused because he can't find any footprints around the city walls, but just when Alan thought he was about to give up, he starts running in a spiral shape around the city. This is really bad news, because if Dogra keeps that up, then it will only be a matter of time before he eventually finds Alan's footprints and tracks him down. They eventually make it to a Granville guard post along the border of the Granville and Carnell territories, and as soon as the guards see Cecile, they are relieved that Alan managed to rescue her because they had heard that she was abducted recently. They ask Alan if they should prepare a carriage to take him and Cecile back to the manor, and that would be great, but just then, one of Alan's hawks relays that Dogra has just found his footprints, and he's on his way here right now. As soon as Alan realizes that Dogra is here, he takes off running and warns Cecile of the situation. She asks him why he didn't just wait at the guard post to fight Dogra off with the knights, but considering Dogra's strength, even if all the knights were to fight together, they would be nothing but cannon fodder for Dogra, so it's best not to get them involved. Hearing that, Cecile begins to feel guilty because she knows Alan has been risking his life to protect her, so she tells him he can leave her behind to save himself. However, Alan would never do such a thing. Sure, Cecile may be a little annoying at times, but he does care about her, so he's going to do everything in his power to make sure she is safe, and Cecile is really grateful that Alan is willing to stick by her side. Alan continues running all throughout the night, and by the next morning, they have gotten pretty close to the Granville estate, so they should be able to make it back by tomorrow morning. However, just when things were looking good, one of Alan's scouts spots that murder gulch that Alan injured 3 years ago, and it's on his tail now that it has caught its scent. Running isn't really an option anymore since the murder gulch is already really close, and it won't hesitate to kill Cecile if it catches her, so Alan decides to stay undefeated before they make their escape. A few moments later, while Cecile is hiding behind a nearby rock, Alan comes face to face with the murder gulch, and he has a score to settle. He immediately spawns all of his heavy hitters, and has them hold the murder gulch in place while he throws a metal ball at its remaining eye, but the monster was prepared for that and caught the ball midair. Alan hadn't anticipated the monster adapting to his attack pattern, and before he could come up with a backup plan, he had already been grabbed. The murder gulch is currently trying to squeeze the life out of Alan, and the only reason he isn't dead yet is because he is spamming healing leaves to keep his HP from reaching 0. The murder gulch then grabs Alan by the head and puts him in its mouth before eating him just like Aaron's mom, and Cecile is horrified because she thinks she just saw Alan die, but fortunately, Alan managed to switch all of his stat points to durability and HP, so even though the murder gulch bit down on him, its teeth couldn't cut through his body. And now that Alan is within perfect striking distance, he proceeds to pull out his dagger and stab the murder gulch in the other eye, killing it once and for all. Once Alan was back on the ground, Cecile runs up to him with tears in her eyes because she was so worried about him, but unfortunately, they aren't safe yet, because all the time Alan wasted fighting the murder gulch allowed Dogra to catch up to them. Dogra immediately kicks Alan to the floor, and Alan still has no idea how to deal with that teleportation ability, so his options are limited here. Dogra begins walking up to Alan and draws his sword as he plans to make Alan's death as excruciating as possible, but just then Cecile launches a fireball at him. This catches both Alan and Dogra off guard since neither of them was expecting Cecile to do that, but it worked because Dogra then turned his attention to her and smacked Cecile across the face. The only reason he didn't kill her for what she did is because he needs her alive to complete his job, but seeing him hurt Cecile made Alan incredibly angry. He has a plan to take Dogra down, but he needs to buy time for it to work, so he starts rage-baiting Dogger by reminding him that he is just a coward who ran away from his post in the war after only a year, and now all he can do is pick on weak children. The rage baiting was successful because Dogger starts taking all his anger out on Alan, and a few minutes later, Alan's plan finally comes to fruition because Xenoph has arrived. Earlier, he had sent one of his parrots over to Xenoph to inform him of the situation and bring him here since he is the only warrior here who is strong enough to take Dogger out, and Xenoph did not disappoint. When Dogger tried to stab Xenoph, his blade did absolutely nothing to him, and when Xenoph counterattacked, he unleashed a terrifying amount of force, splitting Dogger in two along with everything that was behind him. Afterwards, Xenoph escorted Alan and Cecile back to the estate, and the family was overjoyed to see Cecile back safe and sound. A meeting was held to discuss what happened, and that's where Alan informed Granville that Carnell was behind all of this. Since his mines were no longer profitable with the dragon around, Carnell conspired with the royal messenger to attempt to steal half of Granville's mining rights, but he couldn't let Granville inform the king of what he was doing, so he intended to hold Cecile hostage and use her to force Granville to sign. Granville is outraged upon learning all this, so he orders for a carriage to be prepared immediately because he plans to head to the capital right away. However, Alan tells him to wait a moment because he needs to think this through before he takes action. If Granville were to simply report this to the king, then sure, Carnell would probably get what he deserves, but the royal messenger would likely go unpunished. To make sure everyone is dealt with properly, Alan offers to relinquish his mining rights and tells Granville to use those mining rights as a bargaining chip with the king to ensure that a thorough investigation is conducted. Granville is shocked because it sounds like Alan is trying to convince him to bribe the royal family, and that's exactly what Alan is trying to do. He tells Granville that as the head of the family, it's his job to get his hands dirty when necessary to ensure his family's safety, and Granville realizes he is right, so he thanks Alan for the advice and prepares to follow through on it. As a result of the ensuing investigation, the royal messenger was fired, and the Carnell territory was dissolved and put under royal rule for the time being. Later on, given everything they had been through, Granville granted Cecile and Alan permission to receive a special lecture on what a noble's duty is, but only on the condition that they don't tell anyone about this. Basically, as far as the general public knows, the kingdom of Radash has been at peace for a long time, but it is far from the truth. Around 112 years ago, a self-proclaimed demon lord appeared and demanded that the rulers of all the different kingdoms submit to him, but naturally, no one agreed to such a ridiculous request. However, roughly 50 years after the initial declaration, the event known as the Great Calamity took place. The demon lord went on the offensive, and using a massive army of monsters, all B rank and above, he began to invade the surrounding nations, completely destroying 4 of them in only 4 years. To put a stop to the Demon Lord's reign of terror, the different continents banded together to form an alliance to fight against the Demon Lord, and as part of that alliance, each continent was required to found an academy to train fighters before they were sent to the front lines, but their efforts hadn't been enough to stop the Demon Lord, because the invasion had continued. That was until the hero known as Helmios was born in the Empire and restored humanity's hope. He was the first person to ever have the talent of hero, and after he joined the battle, the tide shifted dramatically in favor of humanity. Helmios is currently 22, and he is still courageously fighting on the front lines to this day. Alan was amazed to learn all this because he recalled how the hero and demon lord classes had 5-star difficulties, so they are probably some of the strongest people in this world. As for the noble's duty, it is simply a mandatory 3-year draft into the army for any nobles who possess a talent. It is a rule that is heavily dreaded because even with the hero on their side, half of all noble recruits still end up dying. Later on, Granville calls Alan into a meeting because he has something he wants to discuss with him. He had attempted to get Cecile exempted from the draft, but the king refused because her wizardess talent is too valuable to overlook, thus Granville would like to ask Alan for a favor. He is aware that Alan has some kind of talent, so he offers him 600 gold coins, which is all the money he could gather at the moment, and asks Alan to please accompany Cecile to the academy and protect her when she inevitably gets sent to the battlefield. Alan is hesitant to agree at first, because while he does care about Cecile, this is a huge responsibility to shoulder. That said, he does need to face stronger and stronger opponents if he wants to continue leveling up, so this might be a good chance for him to grow. Thus, he accepts the Baron's request to protect Cecile and promises to defeat the Demon Lord someday. Back in Alan's home village, Mash and Mula asks Chappie where the letter from their big brother is. There isn't one today, but they get something even better. Alan has come to visit them in person, as he's finally back home. It's been 4 whole years since they've last seen each other, so his parents can't believe how much he's grown. Alan looks at his siblings, and he says that they have grown a lot too. Mula hides from Alan, so he wonders what's wrong. Rodden explains that Mula doesn't really remember Alan because she was barely a year old when they last saw each other. Alan is completely stunned because he's been playing with her through Chappie and he thought that they were close. His parents then thank him for all the letters and money that he's been sending. They're a bit worried though, and they wonder if he's still making enough to get by. Alan reveals that he's now a guest of the Granvilles instead of their manservant. On top of that, he will be heading to Academy City in April. This news is unbelievable, so his family is shocked, and Alan admits that it won't be easy to send money anymore. That's why Alan has decided to just hand them a lump sum of 100 gold coins. His parents are startled by that amount of money, and they say that they can't accept it. It's way too much, but Alan tells them not to worry. He explains that he still has 600 gold coins saved up from selling armored ants. His parents can't even imagine having so much money, and his brother wonders what armored ants are. Alan explains that they are insect monsters that nest at the foot of the White Dragon Mountains. Alan says that he also came across a bunch of goblin and orcs in that area. Alan's parents couldn't be more proud because their son is still out there doing the unbelievable. Unfortunately, Alan has work waiting for him, so it's already time for him to go. Before he leaves, Mesh says that he will go to the academy too once he turns 12. Alan loves the idea and says that he will be waiting for him. Little Mula finally builds the courage to say something, so she wonders if Alan is the big brother from all the letters. Alan says that he is, and he apologizes for not visiting more often. The entire family then shares a warm embrace, and his parents tell him to stay safe. They want him to keep chasing his goals, but they warn him not to bite off more than he can chew. Alan then says goodbye to his family, and he heads back to the Granville estate. After he returns, Cecil finds Alan sweeping the courtyard, and she's as rude as ever. She sarcastically calls him their honored guest, and she wonders why he's sweeping. That's not his job anymore, because he already quit being a manservant behind her back. Alan says that he's just lending a hand until they leave for the academy. Cecil then changes her tone when she wonders if Alan is really serious about coming to Academy City to fight in the war. She points out that the noble's duty is really dangerous, and it doesn't even apply to him. Alan simply tells her that it's the job that he was hired to do. Cecil wasn't expecting this answer, and she just calls him a weirdo. Just then, Krina and Dogora arrive, because they came to see their friend Alan. Alan introduces them to the Granville children that he has served for the past 4 years. Cecil flips on her fancy noble switch, and formally introduces herself. Alan explains that she will be joining them for the entrance exam that's in 3 days. Krina immediately takes a liking to her, and she asks Cecil if they can be friends. Alan then asks the two of them if they are ready for the exam. They proudly reveal that after years of training, they are now tough enough to take down great boars. Alan has to remind them that it's an academic test, so he wonders if they studied. They aren't so confident about that, so they don't answer. Later, Seabass warmly welcomes Alan's friends, and they all dig into a nice meal. Cecil is horrified by how Alan's friends feast, but her father is amused. That night, Krina and Dogora ask about the academy, and whether they will fight lots of monsters. Dogora says that he's most excited about chasing his dream of joining the knighthood. Cecil whispers to Alan to confirm that they won't be telling his friends about the war. She wonders if that's really okay, and Alan says that they should at least wait until the time is right. They will tell them eventually, because Krina and Dogora deserve to know the risk to their lives. As they prepare for bed, Alan thinks about everything that's happening. Krina will be dubbed a baron after she graduates from the academy. This means that she's duty-bound to join the war effort alongside Cecil. As for Dogora, his enlistment is still up in the air. He may get the option to enlist, depending on his track record, after graduating. They will for sure be attending the academy together, so Alan just hopes that everyone can become good friends. He even wishes that he could pray to Elmia for the ability to check their stats. 3 days later, the four of them say their goodbyes, and set off for the academy. Cecil's parents get emotional as they leave, and everyone in town waves goodbye. Our heroes eventually arrive in the kingdom of Radish, and Alan is amazed by the massive city. Cecil explains that there are multiple dungeons scattered in and around it. She's heard that students can brush up on their unique talents at each one. They then board a train, and Alan takes a moment to admire it. It has high-quality craftsmanship from the dwarves of the Bacchus Empire. When they arrive at Radish Academy, they see that a ton of people have come for the test. Cecil explains that around 20,000 hopefuls travel here from all over the country every single year. When they go inside, they are welcomed by a receptionist. She explains that before the exam, everyone has to undergo an appraisal ceremony. Krina is confused, so Alan explains that it's the same ceremony that they all did when they turned 5 years old. Dogora goes up first, and he puts his hand in front of the appraisal crystal. The receptionist says that his attributes get an exceptional rating, so he can move on to the written exam. Dogora is pretty annoyed because his results are the same as when he was 5. He wonders what all his training's been for, and Krina tries to cheer him up. Alan thinks about how these ranks only reflect developmental speed. That means that they don't change based on age or level. Cecil goes next, and the receptionist says that her results are just as impressive. Alan notices that she has S-rank intelligence, which is exactly what you would expect from a wizardess. Krina's up after her, and everyone is shocked when the crystal glows brighter than ever. The receptionist recognizes her as Krina the Sword Lord, and she's glad to have her here. Krina's disappointed though, because just like Dogora, everything's the same as from when she was 5. Finally, it's Alan's turn, and Cecil can't wait to see what the crystal shows. Alan takes a test, and the crystal blinds everyone when it shines. Unfortunately for our hero, every single one of his attributes shows up as rank E. The examiner has no choice but to tell Alan that he failed. Dogora points out that Alan's attributes didn't show at all when they were kids, and he notices that this time, it says that Alan is a summoner. Alan doesn't know what to think, because the text glitch got fixed, but his development speed is still dragged down by Helm mode. Cecil can't believe that Alan failed, and she refuses to accept it. Alan tells her that it's okay, because there are still things for him to do here, even if he doesn't enroll in the academy. His friends are all upset, and they try to fight on his behalf. Just then a guy and an elf appear, and they wonder what all the fuss is about. Krina insists that the results are wrong, because she saw Alan beat a murdergelsh all by himself. The guy is impressed to hear that a person Alan's age could take down that kind of beast. What's even more impressive to him is that all of Alan's attributes are ranked E. He's never seen a result like this before, and he determines that the person you heard about really does exist. It turns out that this match is an old prophecy from someone named Master Rosen. It said that a boy entirely ranked E would one day appear. The elf calls the guy next to him Helmios, and our heroes are shocked to hear this name. Alan remembers hearing the name during their lecture on the Demon Lord. This is a huge deal, because Helmios is the hero, and the hope of all mankind. Helmios approaches Alan, and Alan wonders what he's doing. The hero uses his appraisal skill, and reads off Alan's real stats out loud. His attack is 570, while his MP and intelligence are all the way up at 1600. Alan is caught off guard, because he never thought that anyone would be able to see his stats. This is his worst nightmare, so he wishes that the blabbermouth would stop saying it out loud. Helmios continues, and says that in terms of attributes, Alan is basically on par with an arch-wizard. The part that's really strange to him is that Alan doesn't have a single magic skill. Helmios apologizes, because it looks like there was a malfunction with the crystal ball. Cecil wonders if this means that Alan can take the exam. Helmios says that he can, but only in one condition. He says that Alan has to show him what he can do with his summoner talent. Cecil's really happy for him, but Alan surprisingly declines. He says that first of all, they don't even know this guy. Helmios formally introduces himself, and he says that heroing is what he does. Alan still isn't impressed, and he says that he's never heard of him. He points out that Helmios just looked at his attributes, so it's only fair that Helmios shows his with the crystal ball. That will make them even, so Helmios agrees to do it. Deep down though, Alan just wants to see his stats, so he can scrutinize them. Unfortunately for him, the hero has nothing but A and S ranks, and he's spec'd for physical attacks. With that done, Helmios says that it's Alan's turn to show his summon ability. Alan summons Mousy, and everyone is amazed. He simply says that this is his ability, and Helmios declares that the named summoner makes sense now. Alan points out that he just passed the screening process they agreed on, and he excuses himself. As he leaves, Helmios calls him a kooky kid, but the elf points out that he isn't one to talk. Next up for our heroes is a written test, which covers math, vocabulary, and history. It also has questions that gauge their ability to deal with different types of monsters. When the results come in, Dogora is delighted to see that he got a B, and Krina wonders how Alan did. She sees that Alan scored an S, and he points out that she got a C, Cecil got an A, which means that they all passed. After collecting their uniforms, Krina says that they're officially students now. They then discuss where they should live. Krina says that they could stay at a dorm, but Alan thinks they should rent a house. Before they do that, Alan explains that students need to apply for adventurer cards. They head to the Adventurers Guild and meet with the receptionist. While their cards are printed, she explains how dungeons work around here. The dungeons here are split into 3 difficulty ranks, which are C, B, and A. The bottom floor of each one has a treasure chest, guarded by a boss. The chest might hold a rare item, so it's worth going for. Alan's really excited, because he already knows exactly which rare item he's after. Alan raises his hand, because he would like to know if he can put in a request to the guild for some D-rank magic stones. The receptionist allows it, and she wonders how many he would like. Alan offers 100 gold coins for 10,000 of the stones. The receptionist is startled, but she accepts the offer and tells Alan to come back in a week. Alan thinks about how he actually wants to stock up 2 million stones over his 3 years that he will be at the academy. Just then, their cards are ready, and the receptionist says that everyone has to start at E rank. They're all planning to adventure together, so the receptionist wonders if they would like to register as a party now. Alan says that they do, and he announces that their name will be No Life Gamers. His friends are a bit confused, so Alan explains what it means. A No Life Gamer is someone who goes hardcore to become as strong as possible. The others understand now, and they love the name. Alan then thinks about how he had to balance gaming with work in his old life. He was always busy, so he was never a true no-life gamer. Now that things are different here, he declares that he can finally be the GOAT. A little later, our heroes are amazed, because their new house is huge. This is normal in Academy City, because parties of 10 or 20 people often live together. Once our heroes settle in, Alan has something serious to talk about with Krina and Dogora. He explains that he and Cecil share a long-term goal for after they graduate in 3 years. Before telling them what that is, he catches them up on everything he learned, including how the academy is meant to recruit soldiers for war. He then reveals that he's going to fight alongside Cecil and defeat the Demon Lord. Krina immediately tells him to count her in, because she wants to fight too. Alan thanks her, because he was hoping that she would say that. As for Dogora, he hesitates, and Alan doesn't blame him. He points out that half the people that get sent to the front lines never come back home. It's not an easy decision to make, so he tells Dogora to take his time. Dogora thinks about how beating the Demon Lord would make him more exalted than any knight. That's all he needs to know, so he signs up too. Just then, Alan's grimoire appears to confirm that the others have joined his party. His friends are startled, and Alan is surprised when he realizes that they can see it too. He explains that it's part of his talent, and them being able to see it means that they're all in this together. Krina then wonders how they should start preparing to beat the Demon Lord. Alan explains that they will pass trials and clear dungeons to get stronger. They also need better equipment and a cleric who can heal. Alan then says that he would like to share one more thing about himself. He reveals for the first time that his skills develop 100 times slower than normal. That's why he needs a huge stock of magic stones and MP to pass the trials. Ultimately, he's hoping to find an MP recovery ring in one of the dungeon treasure chests. Cecil points out that that explains why he requested so many magic stones. Now that all that is out of the way, Alan says that things are about to get really busy. He is counting on the others, and they all say that there are no life gamers. In homeroom the next day, they meet their teacher for the next 3 years, named Karlova. He says that he's also the guildmaster of the Adventurers Guild in the royal capital. His talent is swordmaster, and he was called in because the academy has a sword lord joining this year. The sword lord is Krina, but she doesn't make a big deal of it. Karlova then explains that they have some big tests coming in July and February. Any score less than 40 is an F, so he says that they better study hard. He then points out that the student body here includes serfs, commoners, and nobles. However, the only thing that matters to him is talent, so all titles will get thrown out. Alan immediately stops addressing Cecil formally, but she doesn't like it one bit. As the days pass, Alan explains that at the academy, there are 4 days of class, and 2 days off each week. The afternoon classes are tailored to each talent, but there's none for summoners. That's why Alan got permission to use that free time however he wants. His plan is to sit in on a little bit of every class. Soon enough, their first day off finally arrives. Our heroes head to a dungeon, but it doesn't look like what they imagined. The outside is just a building, and it's right in the middle of town. Inside, they wonder if this is really the right place, and Dogora points out that the receptionist said it was. When they enter the actual dungeon, they are greeted by a machine called the Dungeon General Operation System. It welcomes the no-life gamer party to the C-rank dungeon, and it says that it will direct them to another dimension where their dungeon is located. Alan is confused, so it explains that all travel through the dungeon is separated by isolated rooms. Therefore, other adventurers cannot enter theirs. Alan freaks out because this game has instancing. His friends don't know what that means, so he explains that they will be isolated from the rest of the server. Most importantly, it means that he won't have to worry about anyone else seeing his summoner skills. Just then, the cube opens the portal to their dungeon, and our heroes head inside. It turns out to be a giant maze, so Alan sends Hawkins to map it. Dogora looks at how the map is being made, and he says that it's really convenient. Alan says that the monsters here are all low rank, so they shouldn't waste their time by beating more than necessary. They should also ignore the treasure chests, because they might be booby-trapped. Alan just wants to clear the C-rank dungeon as fast as possible, so they can move on to the rank one. Alan then takes a moment to look at everyone's stats. He really enjoys looking at all their abilities and their weapons. Just then, Alan spots a slime in front of them, and Cecil gets to work. She uses Fireball and completely destroys the monster. The others wish that they could use magic like her, but Alan points out that they have their own skills. They had no idea, so Alan shows them what his grimoire says. Krina's skill is called Slash, and Degora's is called Full Might. They don't know how to use them, but Alan is sure that they will learn at the academy. Just then, Alan notices that corpses here vanish and leave behind magic stones. He thinks about how he wants E-rank stones for his Leave of Life healing item. Our heroes then continue through the dungeon, and they eliminate several creatures. Eventually, something happens to them, and they wonder why they feel an energy rushing through them. Alan explains that they just passed the trial of the gods. Soon they reach the end of this floor, which means they can go to the next one. Another cube asks if they want to leave or move to the next floor. The cube explains that if they continue, they can always exit through this system on any floor. That sounds great to our heroes, so they decide to keep pushing forward. Just then, the room changes, and a different cube speaks to them. It wonders if they're ready to leave, or if they want to go to the next floor. If they leave now, their progress gets saved, and they can start from the spot they left. Also, he says that they can re-enter the dungeon as much as they want. After clearing the first floor, our heroes decide to call it a day. All that took 10 straight hours of fighting, so our heroes are exhausted. It was really fun though, so they decide to spend all their days off, making progress in the dungeon. Alan explains that no matter when, or how often they entered, the dungeon always reloaded the exact same way. This means that Alan can send his summons to farm monsters, even during class. Clearing one floor a day nets him around 200 magic stones. He says that it's the perfect strategy that only a summoner could pull off. On their 5th trip, the party finally reaches the final floor of the C-rank dungeon. Some tough-looking monsters are sleeping down here, and one of them is a boss. Cecile says that she wants everyone to see just how strong Alan really is. She asks him to fight the boss using his summoner powers, and Alan agrees. He has only summoned mice and birds around them, so they're eager to see what he can really do. As he approaches his enemies, Alan reveals that he spent 35,000 D-rank stones on crop of magic items. He then used those to push his enhanced skill all the way to level 6. At level 6, Enhance boosts 2 attributes of his summoned creatures by a whopping 500. The creatures wake up to attack our hero, but it's too late. Alan summons Braun to use Protect, and then he has Teddy use Crush. The battle is over immediately, and Cecil points out that Alan is really strong. Just then, the treasure chest appears, and the others tell Alan to open it. Alan finds a steel sword inside, and he declares that they beat their first dungeon. When they return to the guild, the receptionist congratulates them for clearing the C-rank dungeon. For the accomplishment, their adventurer cards get upgraded to D-rank. They even earn 2 gold coins for selling the steel sword. They are off to a promising start, so they're proud to call themselves no-life gamers. A while later, Rife informs Alan that a sword lord named Verg will be coming to the school next month to teach a special class. Verg is a living legend, and Alan heard that the hero will be coming too. Alan is outwardly excited, but deep down he wonders why the hero doesn't have anything better to do. Their teacher then announces that every student must conquer a dungeon during summer break 3 months from now. Anyone who fails will be expelled, and he warns that several students die attempting this dangerous assignment every year. Parties can have 8 members, but seniors and anyone outside the academy cannot provide assistance. Everyone immediately starts recruiting, while several students desperately ask Krina to join their parties. Alan considers this amateur recruiting, and he compares it to how people recruit through chats in video games. It's embarrassing to watch, so Alan decides to show these noobs how it's really done. He announces that the no-life gamers need 1 healer, after already conquering 2 C-rank dungeons without one. He shows the class his adventurer card as proof, and he explains that they go dungeon crawling twice a week. Alan promises equal treasure shares, bigger profits, and they only require at least 1 weekly dungeon trip from their recruit. He tells them not to miss out on this offer, because big money could be theirs. One kid hears him say big money, and it catches his interest. During lunch, Cecil points out that nobody came to take up their offer. She wonders if it's because there's no clerics in their class. Alan explains that it's probably because most kids with a healing talent get taken in by the church. Just then, a blonde student named Keel approaches Alan and reveals that he possesses the cleric talent. He says that if they're still looking for a healer, then he would be interested in hearing more about their party. Alan happily tells him to have a seat, so they can discuss it over lunch. Keel says that he's trying not to eat during the day, but Alan thinks about how this guy doesn't look like he needs to be on a diet. Alan offers to pay for his meal, so Keel doesn't even hesitate to accept. In fact, he takes full advantage and orders a huge meal. Keel scarfs down all the food, and Alan wonders if he was hungry this entire time. Keel cuts right to the point, and he wonders how rich they're getting from raiding dungeons. Alan reveals that each member receives 20 to 40 silver coins per dungeon cleared. Keel is immediately interested, and he would like to join them on a trial basis. Alan accepts, and Keel says that they can count him in for next weekend. Our heroes are glad to hear it, so they offer him even more food. Keel can only wonder why they're all being so polite. Alan thinks about how they have to be really nice, because finding a cleric is really difficult, and he refuses to let Keel escape. A while later, Keel enters a C-rank dungeon with the party, as their temporary 5th member. Krina erects a monster, and Keel feels powered up all of a sudden. Alan explains that it's normal, because he just passed the trial of the gods. Keel finds it very strange, because he hasn't done anything. Alan tells them that being friends in the same party means that they all get stronger when any one of them beats a monster. On the 3rd day of their dungeon crawl, the party reaches the final floor, and they face a group of goblins. The boss monster is among them, so Alan tells Krina, Cecil, and Dogora to do their thing. The 3 of them attack together, and take out several enemies. One attack gets away, and flies right at Keel, but Alan protects him. Keel is in disbelief to see Alan summoning power for the very first time. The fight comes to an end, but Dogora took some damage after letting his guard down. Keel immediately uses heal, and he completely removes Dagora's wounds. Everyone is really glad to have him here, but Alan is a bit disappointed about something else. He's not able to see Keel's stats, because right now he's only a guest. Alan then goes to Keel, and he wonders where he learned his skills. Keel explains that he practiced on injured church visitors, because healing work paid 10 silver coins daily. Krina is jealous about others being able to use skills, but Keel points out that it took him 2 months of practice to get it right. Dogora is really motivated by this, so he declares that he's going to master his skill too. Just then, the defeated boss leaves a silver treasure chest. Alan says that they're really lucky, and he opens the chest to find a mithril buckler. They immediately go to sell it, and everyone is shocked when Alan tells them that it's sold for 15 gold coins. Everyone receives 3 gold coins, and 1/5 of the collected magic stones. Alan explains that the stones can be exchanged for even more money, and the money-hungry Keel salivates after hearing this. Alan can't help but notice that Keel seems way more focused on money than their summer break assignment. Alan actually likes this, and he wonders if Keel would like to join their party for good. Unfortunately, Keel surprises everyone by rejecting their offer. He explains that he's heard that the cleric talent is a big deal at the academy. He wants the option to work with other parties that might pay more to have him. He doesn't plan to be exclusive to just one party, because he needs to earn as much money as he can. Keel doesn't explain why, and he just leaves. 1 month later, Alan's really excited, as he tells everyone that he's going to go out for some practice. Alan has finally reached another enormous milestone after spending most of his money and magic stones. His fuse ability reaches 10 million experience points and level 6, while summon also increases to level 6. Grimoire expansion reaches level 5, raising Alan's card inventory from 50 slots to 60. Alan also unlocks the mysterious awakened skill. He can only wonder what this is, and he heads to a C-rank dungeon. Alan spent most of his money in magic stones, but it's clear now that it was worth it. He says that after 2 years and 11 months, he has finally received 6 completely new C-rank summons for his roster. Alan doesn't waste any time, as he summons all of them, and he is shocked by how huge they are. Bacon is a beast with a charge skill, and its card increases health and attack by 50 points. Fran is a bird with a breakthrough skill, and her card increases agility and intelligence by 50 points. Pion is an insect with a paralyzing sting skill, and its card increases endurance and agility by 50 points. Finny is a fish with a shark oil skill, and its card increases Alan's MP and intelligence by another 50 points. Steely is a stone guard with a substitute skill, and his card increases health and endurance by 50 points as well. Mappo is a grass creature with a garnish skill, and its card increases Alan's MP and luck by 50 points too. Alan declares that it's now time to unlock the newest type of summon creature. The only way to do this is by trying all possible combinations. Alan tests every fusion combination, and finally discovers the completely new spirit type. The C-rank spirit increases endurance and intelligence by 50, while granting resistance against physical damage. Alan summons her, and he's shocked to find that she can actually speak. Alan determines that this is because her intelligence stat is very high. Alan names her Maria, and she dances around the room from happiness. This is how Alan discovers that she can freely pass through solid walls. Maria points out that it's because she's a spirit, and Alan says that this will come in handy in dungeons. Maria explains that she can also enter human dreams and create nightmares. This catches Alan off guard, and he doesn't plan on using that disturbing power. Our hero decides that it's time to move on to testing the mysterious Awaken spell. He uses Awaken on Denka, and it changes the Grasshopper's normal hop ability into the powerful Swarm ability. Hundreds of grasshoppers immediately fill the room, and Alan can only wonder what's happening. He realizes that the awakened skill unlocks the creature's stronger hidden ability. Alan declares that this is another powerful weapon to add to his arsenal. A little later, Berg arrives at the academy beside Helmios and another sword lord named Sylvia. The teacher introduces them and wonders if any students have any questions. Krina immediately asks Berg how someone learns skills, and the teacher thinks about how that's part of next year's curriculum. The other students can't believe that she's jumping ahead, and Berg realizes that Krina is the new sword lord. He can only wonder why she's in such a rush, so she explains that she wants to be stronger like Alan. Berg wonders who that is, and Helmios explains that it's the boy that he told them about earlier. Berg tells Krina to follow him, so Helmios tells Sylvia that they should work with the rest of the students. Berg then orders Krina to attack him, while focusing her mind on using her skill. Alan thinks about how it's time to see how well Krina stacks up against a person with 40 years on the front line. Krina uses her slash skill, but Berg is disappointed. He declares that this is no skill, and he pushes her away. Krina uses slash over and over again, and Cecil's stunned to see how easily Berg is stopping it. Alan can't believe how much of a hard trainer this guy is, because he isn't even explaining anything to Krina. Berg just knocks her down again, and he wonders if she's ready to give up. He says that she can take a year to learn the proper way to fight, and come back to him. Krina refuses, and continues using slash repeatedly. Alan realizes that Krina must feel like she's already behind, because he and Cecil can use skills. Hours pass, and Helmios can't believe that they're still fighting. He wonders if Alan would like to spar with him, but Alan is furious. He calls Berg a geezer, and he thinks about how this old man better start giving Krina some advice. Berg just tells Krina to quit already, but she once again refuses. She points out that Alan wouldn't give up either, because he's not the type. Whenever she saw him, he was challenging himself, or racking his brain about something. Alan is chasing after a big dream, so she needs to step up and get tougher. Everyone is stunned, and Berg gives her some instruction. He tells her to empty her mind of everything, except for her skill. With a clear mind, she should throw everything she has at him. Krina does exactly what he said, and everyone goes silent. She calmly says the word slash just one time, without thinking about anything else. This time her skill activates, and it releases a ton of power. Berg's blade nearly shatters to pieces, and he tells Krina that she did well. Everyone watches in amazement, and he tells her to remember this moment. Krina can't believe that it worked, and she collapses from exhaustion. Helmios wonders if it would be better for Berg to teach by example, instead of putting Krina through this. Berg explains that he got the feeling that Krina was more suited to hands-on training. Still, he's very impressed, because he didn't expect her to learn this in just one day. Alan heals her, and she immediately goes to Berg to thank him for the lesson. Helmios says that it takes a real lunatic to go that hard during training, and Alan couldn't agree with him more. Helmios can only wonder what Alan's big dream is, but Alan just tells him that he will find out after he's convinced that he can trust him. Afterwards, in a dungeon, Alan summons Maria and introduces her to his friends. He explains that this talking spirit will be sort of a bodyguard for them, and she will protect them. Alan summons a bunch of friends, so they can ride on them and move faster through the dungeon. They soon encounter a monster, and Krina determines that this is the perfect time to test out her skill. It's called Air Slash, and it obliterates the beast. Krina declares that she can use skills whenever she wants now, and this makes Dogora jealous. The no-life gamers have just conquered another dungeon, so Alan points out that they all have C-rank adventurer status now. He wants to celebrate with the feast, and he says that it can also serve as a welcome party for Keel. Keel says that he's sorry, because he has to decline. He would feel bad for his family, but Alan doesn't know what he means. Keel explains that his family all moved here with him when he enrolled in the academy. Unfortunately, it's been hard for them to make a decent living because they have no connections here. That's why enjoying a feast on his own would make him feel guilty. Alan reveals that they just so happen to be looking to hire someone to help with chores around the house. He wonders if Keel's family would be interested in doing that, because they would be able to live with them at the same time. They have plenty of spare rooms, and of course he offers to pay them a very good salary. Keel is stunned as he can't understand why Alan would do this, so Alan simply says that it's because they're friends. Keel is hesitant, so Cecil makes the deal even better. She says that they can split their treasure from the dungeon in 6 ways instead of 5. The extra one would be used as a salary for Keel's family. In return, Keel could give all his magic stones to Alan. Keel wonders why Alan would even want them, so the others explain that Alan needs a bunch of them to level up. That's a really fair deal, so Keel accepts their offer. That night, Keel and a bunch of people arrive at our hero's house. Alan notices that he doesn't see Keel's parents, and Keel's younger sister named Nina introduces herself. She thanks Alan for the invitation, and Alan says that it's no problem. Inside, Alan says that there's plenty of food to go around, so he tells the huge group to eat as much as they want. Alan can't help but wonder why Keel's name hasn't shown up in his grimoire, even though they're friends now. Cecil says that she was surprised to learn that Keel is a member of nobility, and the others are stunned. Cecil explains that the way Nina introduced herself was a dead giveaway. Keel comes clean, and he reveals that they're actually former nobles. Their family was stripped of their title, which is how he ended up living with his sister and their servants who had no place to go. Cecil feels terrible about bringing it up, but Keel tells her not to worry. He's gotten used to the commoner lifestyle, but Nina's having a harder time. Nina assures everyone that she will do her part with chores, like everyone else. Dogora tells them that it's no big deal, because they don't care about social status anyway. Alan even explains that he and Krina rose up from serfdom. Keel finds this shocking, because he thought that Alan and Cecil were both from nobility. Cecil explains that she is, and the servants immediately show her respect. She tells him to relax, because there are equals here. Alan explains everyone's background, and Cecil says that she comes from the Granville fiefdom. Keel's entire group stands up in horror after hearing this, and his servant tells Nina to get behind him. Hearing the name Granville has terrified them, and Cecil wonders what's wrong. Keel becomes furious, and he declares that it's all their fault. He can't hold back his anger, as he says that the Granvilles destroyed his entire family. Our heroes are stunned, as they begin to realize what's going on, and Keel reveals that his father is Carnell. Dogora wonders what this means, and Alan explains that they had some problems with the Carnell family. Keel refuses to let him downplay the situation, because a royal messenger told him exactly what happened. He was told that the entire thing was a plot by the Granville family. Alan remembers hearing that Carnell had a son with a talent. Alan realizes now that the talentless daughter that Carnell bragged about is actually Nina, and the son with a talent who's supposed to fulfill the noble's duty has turned out to be Keel. Keel demands to know what they ever did to the Granvilles, and Cecil says that Keel has been misled. She will explain everything, but first she would like for everyone else in Keel's group to leave the room. When they're alone, Cecil explains that Carnell tried stealing the Granville's mithril mining rights. Carnell hired assassins who kidnapped her, but Alan defeated them and helped her escape. Her father presented the evidence directly to the king, causing every responsible person to be imprisoned. Cecil admits that her father helped destroy the Carnells, but she refuses to feel ashamed about stopping criminals. Keel is at a complete loss for words, because this is the first time hearing the real story. Cecil tells him that if he doesn't believe her, then he can go to the royal capital and ask around. There he will be given the evidence that he can inspect himself. Keel struggles to believe that his father would do something like this, so Alan would like to hear what his father was like to him. Keel explains that his parents treated him kindly until his appraisal ceremony revealed his valuable cleric talent. His father seemed upset, and that's where Keel's childhood memories ended. After that day, they separated Keel from everyone and raised him in another town, using only a small monthly allowance. He was all alone and didn't get any of the education that's typical for nobles. Eventually a tutor showed up when he was 10 years old. Keel was excited to hear that his father had sent a tutor to prepare him for the academy. He finally felt like he was still part of the Carnell family, and he had a role to play. Unfortunately, the allowance suddenly stopped in October, without any explanation. Then Nina showed up, with some servants who were now jobless, with his parents gone. Keel began healing people at the church, because his remaining family desperately needed money. Later, a royal messenger claimed that the Granvilles destroyed the Carnells through a dishonest political scheme. That is when he was also told about the noble's duty to defeat monsters. The messenger told him that if he served for 5 years, the king had granted permission to forgive all his family crimes, and he would reinstate the nobility of the Carnell family. Their name would be cleared, and Keel would become the head of the family. Cecil finds this odd, because normally it's only 3 years. Alan realizes that this is another scheme from another corrupt royal messenger. 5 years at the front lines makes Keel's death very likely, especially because half already die within 3 years. Keel says that he hated his talent for the longest time. However, now he realizes how valuable it is, and the purpose behind it. He apologizes for what his father did, and he's sorry for getting upset. He says that he won't hold it against them if they want to kick him and his group out of their house. Keel still declares that he will restore his family and give Nina somewhere permanent to live. Alan doesn't kick him out, and instead he's glad to see that Keel has a goal. He declares that his goal works perfectly because the no-life gamers also have a goal to achieve. They're on the same path, so he says that Keel should serve in the war with them. Keel is stunned, and he reminds them that he's part of the Carnell family that did terrible things to them. Alan interrupts him to say that it doesn't matter. He points out that half the people sent to the front lines lose their lives within 3 years. The death rate is even worse for 5 years. The royal messenger didn't tell that to Keel, so he is stunned. Cecil reveals that this is exactly what happened to her older brother. Alan then explains that the rampaging monsters are all controlled by a great evil called the Demon Lord. They all have to get much stronger to have any hope of defeating him. A huge part of that is having Keel on their team, so he tells Keel that they should fight together. Keel points out that he would just be using them to further his own goals, but Alan doesn't mind. He tells Keel that he should just fight for what he believes in. Keel says that he doesn't care about the Demon Lord, but what he does want is to get his family back to nobility. That works for our heroes, so they tell him to join forces. Alan reminds him that he doesn't have to shoulder all the burden himself. He says that they can all give it their best, and Keel begins to get emotional. He says okay, and Alan's grimoire finally adds Keel to their party. A while later, the servants tell Keel that they have finished bringing in all the luggage. Maria compliments the work, and Keel's family learns that she's part of Alan's talent. Alan's glad to see everything going smoothly because it seems like their new living arrangement is going to work out. Alan then thinks about how Keel dreams of restoring the Carnels to nobility. A royal messenger supposedly promised that it would happen after he serves 5 years on the front lines. That whole deal seems fishy to Alan, so he determines that he better check it out. Later, Alan's party prepares for their next challenge, as it's time to conquer the B-rank dungeon. Keel points out that this doesn't seem very different from the C-rank dungeons. Alan explains that the monsters inside should range all the way from D to B rank. There are also poison and arrow traps, so Cecil says that they should take some panacea ahead of time. Everyone takes the medicine, but it tastes terrible. Alan wonders if everyone is ready, and he brings up something he heard. He heard that only 1/5 of all challengers manage to clear this dungeon. They have to take it very seriously, so he summons his friends, and they move out. A little later, Keel celebrates as he rushes towards a treasure chest that he just spotted. Cecil stops him because it's obviously a trap, and Alan sends Maria to have a look. Maria opens the chest, and she is terrified by what she finds. The chest is actually a monster called a mimic, so she runs for her life. Alan tells Maria to use psychokinesis, and she bombards a mimic with her attack. Maria defeats the beast all by herself, and Keel is stunned because mimics are B-rank monsters. Alan says that it's a big deal, because Maria with enhanced stats can beat a B-rank using only half her MP. Just then kind of finds a real treasure chest, and there's a mithril halberd inside. Alan says that they can get 50 gold coins for it, and Keel is thrilled. Our heroes continue through the dungeon, but strangely, Alan soon finds himself waking up. He wonders if he got hit by some kind of sleep trap, and Cecil explains that that's exactly what happened. She says that he should have listened to her and taken a panacea. Alan reveals that he didn't take one on purpose, because he wanted to test things in the dungeon. He put himself in danger for this, so now it's time to investigate what happened. He calls on Maria to help, and his friends can't believe that he's doing research right now. They remember that he does this kind of stuff all the time, so they just leave him be. In the meantime, Dogora and Krina have a sparring session. Alan then asks Maria to review exactly what happened when the trap was triggered. She explains that Fane stepped on a tile, and a bunch of white gas came out. All the Franes fell asleep, and Alan was out like a light as well. Everybody else was totally fine, because they had taken a panacea beforehand. Alan wonders what made him wake up, and Maria says that she used a garnish on him. That's the item that comes from Mappo's ability, and it woke him up within a few seconds. Alan is glad to hear that, because it's useful information about Mappo's ability. Alan tests the trap again, and he finds that the white gas has a range of 5 meters. He can tell that the garnish is still in effect, because the gas isn't making him sleepy at all. Also, the Franes fell asleep, but Maria didn't, so Alan wants to test his other summons. He summons a bunch of them, and most of them fall right to sleep from the gas. However, a few remain awake, and Alan figures out what's going on. Up until now, all his grass-type summons only produced recovery items for HP and MP. However, Mappo just created Garnish, which is Alan's first status recovery item. On top of that, Alan just learned how the traps work. He says that sleep traps are guaranteed to work on animal-type summons, but not grass or spirit types. Alan celebrates, because the game devs really made this one too easy for him. Just then, Dogora screams in celebration, because he finally figured out how to use his skill. He says that it packs a wallop, and Alan sees that his skill experience really did go up. Dagora's eager to get back to the dungeon crawling, so he can bust out his skill. He wonders if Alan is done investigating, so Alan says that they can continue. After 2 months of dungeon crawling over the weekends, the party finally does it. They reach the last floor of the B-rank dungeon, and the boss is waiting. It's a B-rank monster called a huge boar, which is one step up from a great boar. Krina says that it looks like a bigger and meaner version of the boars they hunted back home. Dogora points out that there's no better boss for a dungeon that is filled with beast monsters. Alan looks at everyone's stats, and based on that he isn't worried about their chances at all. He says that they all raised their skill levels to 3 over the past 2 months. Alan thinks about how he always thought that Summoner was special for the buff he gets from his creatures. It turns out that all his friends have skills that are also impressive, and they level up so fast in normal mode. Alan curses, because his friends are bound to outpace him at this rate. The battle is about to begin, so Keel supports the party by using High Protect. Cecil starts it off with Flame Lance, and Alan tells Teddy to get out there. He instructs the bear to use its once per day awakened skill, called Devour. Teddy goes on a rampage, and Alan continues to give orders. He tells Krina and Dogora to fight the boss, so they eagerly attack. Dogora hits it with its full might skill, while Krina uses her air slash. Alan then tells Krina to strike its vitals, so she takes it down with slash. Everyone celebrates, because Krina took down that B-rank monster, like it was nothing. Alan says that those Sword Lord skills are deadly, and Keel patches everyone up with high heal. Just then, Keel spots another treasure chest, but this is a silver one. Inside they find Knuckles, made from scarletite, which is a material even harder than mithril. Alan reveals that it will fetch a couple hundred gold coins at the market. The money-loving Keel loses his mind, and he begins to chant big money. Keel likes to say that it's all for his family, but Alan thinks that it might just be that he loves money. He then thinks about how it didn't take long for the party to clear their first B-rank dungeon. He admires his friends, because recently, they have really toughened up. Considering how strong they are, Alan realizes that normal mode is nothing to laugh at. However, even with this advantage, humanity still struggles against the Demon Lord's army, which shows how powerful the monsters are. Alan vows to make sure everyone reaches a high level before they graduate. That of course includes himself, because he refuses to be left behind. Later Alan thinks about what he has done over the past month. He has sent his creature brigade to fight in the B-rank dungeon. They successfully farmed 34,000 C-rank magic stones, along with 425 gold coins. Alan then put in a request for 300,000 D-rank magic stones, by using the C-rank ones for seed money. It was a good idea, but there was a catch. The guild informed him that the quest limit is 50,000 stones per month. Alan explains that the party also used their treasure funds to buy some brand new equipment. They also got a cart that makes travel to and from the house much easier. Then they bought a magic-operated clock to keep track of time during their dungeon crawls. As for the end-of-semester exams, everyone managed to pass. Come August, the party conquered their second B-rank dungeon, and the academy went into summer break for 2 months. During break Alan used his popo to visit his family. Through the bird he says that it was a long flight, and he tells his family that he's home. They're all startled by the talking bird, but they recognize Alan's voice. Alan explains that he's actually still in Academy City right now. He is speaking with them through his bird, and he can even see them through it. Gerda says that it's a strange power, and Mesh comes to greet his brother. Alan has brought letters for everyone, and there are some from Krina and Dogora too. Krina wrote one for Gerda, but he sadly admits that he can't read. Alan offers to read it for him later, and Rodden says that he's glad that everything seems to be going fine. Gerda's really impressed with Alan's abilities, but Mila complains that it's not fair because she didn't get a talent. Alan learns that she went to the appraisal ceremony, but came up talentless. Alan comforts her by saying that she's the same as Mom and Dad. Mila celebrates being same-sex with them, and Rodden has some exciting news for Alan. He reveals that he's going to be the chief of a brand new frontier village. They will be moving in April of next year, to start breaking ground. Alan congratulates him, and he learns that Krina and Dagora's families will be going too. Alan then thinks about how his parents are well into their 30s now. He says that it's the perfect time for them to start a new chapter of their lives. Alan teases his dad by saying that he better learn to read and write to be a good chief. Alan then goes to speak with Granville, and he reveals that he met Carnell's son. He explains that tensions were high at the start, but Keel became a good friend after they talked it out. They have been taking classes and exploring dungeons together ever since. Granville says that he won't worry about it if Alan is vouching for him, but Alan reveals that there's one thing bothering him. Alan explains the deal that Keel made with the royal messenger. The messenger promised to reinstate the Carnell family if Keel served 5 years in the war. Granville is alarmed because he hasn't heard any rumblings about this among the court. Alan determines that this means that the royal messenger could be making completely false promises. Granville says that reinstating the Carnells is feasible because the king could easily do it. However, Keel having the cleric talent makes it likely that this is a total scam. Alan wonders why, so Granville explains how things work on the front lines. Anyone who returns from the war alive is guaranteed to receive special treatment. This is why many nobles willingly send their children to the front lines. However, these same nobles like having someone with a healing talent nearby to keep them safe. Also, serfs and commoners with healing talents are usually employed within the kingdom to help the sick and injured. This means that there are very few healers actually serving on the front lines. The elves of Rosenheim help make up the difference, but they can't operate individually for various reasons. This makes clerics especially valuable, and many end up being exploited because of it. They are worked to the bone as personal healers for the young nobles. The clerics that do end up on the front line are incredible assets, so those in power try their best to keep them there. The nobles even forge secret pacts to keep clerics at the front lines after their service is over. It's so bad that some clerics never return home except in coffins. Alan fears that this will happen to Kiel, and Granville explains further. Carnell sent Kiel away the instant he learned of his talent. This indicates that he planned on using the boy as a tool eventually. Alan is horrified to hear this, but now it all makes sense. After Kiel became a commoner, the royal messenger tricked him into joining the war. Granville agrees that it's most likely the case, but questions still remain. Alan wonders what the endgame is, and how any of this benefits the royal messenger. He realizes that there might even be another mastermind pulling the strings. Alan then thinks about how Kiel is a good guy, despite his greedy habits. He's only saving money, so his family can live comfortably while he's gone. Alan refuses to let anyone exploit his friend, so he comes up with an idea. He tells Granville that he's going to take the direct approach, and asks the king about this himself. Granville stops him, and asks if he would be willing to let him handle it instead. He points out that the royal messenger fooled Kiel by claiming that the Granvilles set his family up. Granville refuses to sit and do nothing while they drag his name through the mud. Alan agrees to leave it to him because they won't be going to the front lines for some time. Later, Alan explains that his party had more time to go dungeon crawling over summer break. Eventually, they conquer their third B-rank dungeon and return to the guild. The receptionist hands them their updated adventurer cards and says that they are B-rank now. The other adventurers are stunned because they can't believe that a bunch of students pulled this off. The receptionist assumes that they will attempt an A-rank dungeon next, but she has a warning. She says that very few adventurers explore the A-rank dungeons because of the overly formidable boss monsters. She warns that the dungeons may also contain traps of unknown nature, so they should review the documentation carefully. She also has a recommendation if they want to find some suitable gear. She says that they should participate in the auctions that is held by the Adventurers Guild. They can earn good money by putting their items up for auction, or they can participate in the bidding to obtain items that are extremely rare. Alan interrupts her to ask if there are any MP recovery rings at these auctions. The receptionist apologizes because as far as she knows, they don't have any of those. However, she has heard of HP recovery or poison-resistant rings showing up on rare occasion. Alan figures that it wouldn't be that easy, but the auctions still sound promising. Dogora then wonders if they should tackle an A-rank dungeon right away. Alan is all for it, once they review the details and get the right equipment. Several days pass, and we find our heroes inside the A-rank dungeon. Dogora wakes Alan up, and he says good morning to everyone. The others say that this isn't much of a morning, considering they're underground. Alan then checks his map to see what progress has been made. He's sent Hawkins scouting all night, but there's still no sign of the finish line. Alan says that these A-rank dungeons are way too big, and the others can only wonder how long they've spent on this floor alone. It's been at least 3 or 4 days, and Degora's ready to go home. Alan then asks Maria if any monsters tried to attack them while they were asleep. Maria says that a few did, but she eliminated them all. Alan is happy to hear this, because it means that his trap didn't have to activate. He explains that he used Wally as a backup that would explode if anything got near them. The party keeps moving forward, and Alan spots 2 Orc Kings and 1 Cyclops up ahead. Krina and Dogora charge in, without any hesitation. Alan proudly thinks about how B-rank monsters don't spook his friends anymore. He tells him to charge in, and the battle begins. The party unleashes all their skills, and they easily take down the giant beasts. Cecil and Krina clean up some of the last ones, but Degora's still fighting. He finishes off the last Orc King, and he celebrates his victory. Just then, another monster comes out of nowhere to attack him, and he gets pushed back. In the chaos, Dogora steps on a tile that activates a trap. Cecil rushes to help him, but she gets caught up in it, and they both disappear. Alan realizes that it was a teleport trap, and Krina's horrified. They got sent to a different part of the dungeon, and Kiel is really worried about them. The Cyclops goes to attack her heroes next, so Alan tells Krina to eliminate it. Meanwhile, Alan creates as many Maria cards as he possibly can, and he summons them all. He gives them 2 powerful support items each, before sending them to find Cecil and Dogora. Krina finishes off the Cyclops, and declares that they need to go save their friends. Alan stops her, and points out that they won't find them, by rushing around recklessly. He tells her not to worry though, because his summons are already searching. Elsewhere, we see that Cecil and Dogora are in a fight for their lives. They're in really bad shape, as they're up against some terrifying monsters. They do their best to use their skills, but it's no use. Dogora takes a nasty hit, and he has to use his last healing item. Cecil checks her own supply, and finds that she's all out too. The monsters close in on them, and all they can do is wait for their lives to end. Luckily for them, Maria arrives, just in the nick of time. She wipes out every single beast with her awakened ability called Poltergeist. Dogora says that was sick, but our exhausted heroes are in really bad shape. Maria gives them some healing items, but they are still in great danger. Alan's delighted to see that Maria found them, so he tells Maria that they're on their way. Maria tells Cecil and Dogora that help will be here soon, so they should stay put. Dogora is too tired to move anyway, but they're out of time. 2 more monsters appear, and they are rapidly approaching. Cecil declares that they will just have to beat these monsters, and hold out until help arrives. Meanwhile, Alan tells Krina and Keel to hang on tight. He orders Frayne to use the Fleetfoot skill, and they go at warp speed. They race through the dungeon, while the others fight for their lives. Alan curses, because knowing where they are doesn't help when the maze is so complex. He calls out to Dogora and Cecil, and begs for them to stay alive. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.